Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Jim Martin. I'm the Public Information Officer here at the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services. I want to thank you for attending our meeting tonight. I just want to let you know that we're going to wait a few minutes, as I can see that there are a large number of people that are trying to join tonight's meeting. So we'll probably start the presentation starting around 6:35. So thank you very much. Thank you for those that just joined the meeting. We're going to wait a few more minutes. I see that a number of people are still logging on, and we'll try to start the meeting at around 6:35. Good evening, folks. Just waiting for people to continue that are still trying to log into the meeting. We're going to get going in just a couple minutes here. Thank you. All righty, it's 6:35. Once again, I want to introduce myself. My name is Jim Martin. I'm the Public Information Officer here at the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services. I want to welcome you to tonight's public information meeting to discuss the recent agreement with Saint-Gobain to provide alternate water to approximately 1,000 residents in the southern New Hampshire area. I'm going to serve as the moderator for tonight's meeting. Jeff, next slide. Just want to go over some housekeeping notes on tonight's meeting. Tonight's meeting is being recorded and it will be posted to the NHDES PFAS webpage, most likely tomorrow or the next day. All attendees are muted upon entry. If you are having any technical difficulties, Amy Russo standing by. Her information is posted here on the screen. Feel free to email her or give her a call and she can try to help you solve those problems. We have a short presentation planned for this evening, and then at the end, people will be able to ask their questions. You'll be able to put your name in the question box over in the little GoToWebinar dashboard that you will see on your screen. Please don't put your questions into that box. We will have people be able to come on the presentation and ask their questions live at the end of the meeting. With that, I'd like to introduce our two speakers that we have for tonight. Next slide, Jeff. First presenter will be Mike Wimsatt. He's the director of our Waste Management Division. Mike will give an overview of the PFAS situation in southern New Hampshire, as well as some details of some of the agreement. And then Jeff Martz, also on your screen. Jeff is the administrator of the Hazardous Waste Remediation Bureau in our Waste Management Division. And Jeff has been working on the Saint-Gobain site investigation since the summer of 2018. So has a lot of knowledge that he can share. So with that, I will pass on the baton to Mike Wimsatt.
Thank you, Jim, and good evening, everybody. Really pleased to have you all here and glad that we could come before you to share this information. As Jim indicated, the primary focus of tonight's meeting is really to share this information about this recently completed agreement with Saint-Gobain. But we recognize that not everybody may have all the information or the background, so we want to just spend a little bit of time providing some background. And again, with the main focus being about this agreement to provide alternate water to a significant number of people, we recognize this is a very significant milestone for this project, but it is by no means the end of our work. We have much work to do still inside the consent decree area, which we'll talk about, and outside the consent decree area as well. So we don't have any illusions that we have much work to do before us, but we do feel that it's important to share the news about this agreement and answer your questions. And our primary desire is to answer your questions tonight. So we're going to have a brief presentation and then we'll get to the questions. So the agenda for this evening goes as follows. I'm going to start off with an introduction to this project and then a very brief history of how we got here since 2016. And then I'll turn it over to Jeff and he'll talk about a little bit more specifically about the contents of the agreement. And then I'll just come back and spend just a couple minutes talking about a rebate program that we're working on to launching. And then we'll go to questions and answers. So with that, why don't we go ahead and get underway. Jeff? Or the next slide, Jeff, sorry. So again, what I want to talk to you about tonight is just to give you some background on this PFAS contamination problem in southern New Hampshire. I know that many of you know a lot about this, but there may be some who are participating in the call that don't know as much. So we want to spend just a little bit of time bringing everybody up to speed on that. Next slide, Jeff. So the brief history on this is that in 2016, Saint-Gobain, as most of you know, operates a manufacturing plant in Merrimack, New Hampshire. And because of some issues they had in other states, at their facilities in other states, namely New York and Vermont, they took a sample of the water from the water fountain in their facility back in 2016, and they did detect PFOA at about 30 parts per trillion in that water sample. And that water, interestingly enough, was actually supplied by the Merrimack Village District public water system that serves potable water in the plant. And so that indicated that we had some contamination of those wells, which are located, further from the plant in Merrimack. And so we took immediate steps once we were notified of that to sample the public and private drinking water supplies in the vicinity of the plant. That very quickly grew to really what for our department and for our state was an unprecedented effort to do as much sampling as we could to understand the magnitude of the problem. And unfortunately, as we did that work, and we had folks out there on weekends and nights and knocking on doors on Sundays and that sort of thing, trying to get samples wherever we could. We did it pretty far and wide, including across the river in Litchfield. And it quickly became evident with the data that we were getting that we had an airborne transport pathway for this, that this was not, traditionally we think of if a facility has a release and impacts drinking water, it's usually because they've released a contaminant to the ground at the facility and it's gotten into groundwater and migrated to a drinking water well. But in this case, what we were seeing for data really made it clearly evident that this had to be an airborne transport pathway. So our testing expanded very, very rapidly, and we did detect significant impacts not only in Merrimack, but in surrounding towns. So we ended up, seeing impacts in Merrimack and Litchfield and Manchester and Londonderry and Bedford. So it was a really nothing like we'd ever seen before. Next slide, Jeff. And so this slide just kind of depicts the general conceptual model for how this can happen, right? So you have a manufacturing facility that has air emissions that contain a particular contaminant. Those travel on the winds, and they can then be deposited back to the earth through either just surface deposition or rainwater, bringing them down on, and then they get into the soil, they leach through the soil, and they reach the groundwater table, and then eventually make their way to a drinking water well. So that is clearly what our work has shown, that that's clearly what happened here to really many, many thousands of wells. So let's go to the next slide. So I want to talk a little bit about, the standards. So when we first detected this problem in 2016, there were no enforceable standards for this. All we had for information, and I should say that the primary contaminant was perfluorooctanoic acid, or PFOA. And the standard that we had for PFOA was, I believe, at the time, a 200 part per trillion health advisory number. It was not an enforceable standard. It was a number that EPA had published. But the whole issue of what is a safe level, or what concentration in drinking water could pose a risk, was very much evolving at that time. And we really needed to have an enforceable standard so that we could do our work to address this problem. So soon after learning about this, we undertook emergency rulemaking in April of 2016 to set an ambient groundwater quality standard of 70 parts per trillion for PFOA and PFOS, either combined concentration or separately. And that really gave us the basis to make decisions about what the company needed to do to address this contamination. So as we did that work, and that work began very quickly, and sampling began happening and continued happening for every week for many, many months and years. And so if we fast forward, as I said, the concerns about what would be a safe level for these contaminants, for PFOA in particular, was evolving. And we were directed by the New Hampshire legislature to review the available science and propose a enforceable drinking water standard, or maximum contaminant level, and that's what MCL stands for. We did that work. We hired a toxicologist who is actually here with us tonight and will be on the panel to answer questions. And they, along with some of our risk assessors, evaluated the available science and made recommendations for a standard. And then that standard which is the standard that we have today, was actually proposed through rulemaking and was to take effect and did take effect on September 30th of 2019. And then as soon as that became that rulemaking became effective, there was a lawsuit filed by the 3M Corporation, the Plymouth Village Water District, and also a couple other parties to object to this standard and making arguments that it was improperly developed. And so that went to the Merrimack County Superior Court, and within 3 months, by December 31st of 2019, the judge in the case issued a preliminary injunction essentially prohibiting DES from enforcing the standard until the matter was further litigated. So while that was pending, the New Hampshire legislature proposed a law in that 2020 session, which was passed by the chamber or by the legislature and then signed by the governor in July of 2020, and that established those standards, namely for 4 compounds, but the one that we're talking about tonight really is PFOA. That's the primary one, PFOA at 12 parts per trillion. And so that became law, became the enforceable standard as a matter of law in July of 2020. Next slide, Jeff. So while all this was happening, we were, working closely to ensure that Saint-Gobain was fulfilling its responsibilities to address this contamination. And they began preparing for and doing the groundwork and the design and contracting for water line extensions in a significant area, particularly a lot in both Merrimack and Litchfield, while we were also negotiating an agreement. And I want to talk a little bit about the 2018 consent decree. You're going to hear reference to different consent agreements or consent decrees. So sometimes people get confused. There is one associated with the air emissions issue and the regulation of the facility under air law in New Hampshire. That's a different consent decree. The 2018 consent decree, which is how I'll refer to it, essentially was the first formal agreement that we entered into with Saint-Gobain. And it established requirements for the company to provide alternate drinking water within what we designated as a pre-groundwater management zone, or pre-GMZ. And that's depicted on this plan by the red line. And that's the area surrounding the plant within which it was pretty clear to us there was extensive contamination of drinking water wells above the 70 part per trillion standard. And again, we were doing this since 2018, so we were still operating under the 70 part per trillion ambient groundwater quality standard. And then the outer line, the blue line, basically depicts an area, a larger area, where the state retains all its authorities, and where, meaning that we could still ask Saint-Gobain to study and address any contamination, no matter what standard we might set. And then outside that line, the company's responsibilities pursuant to the agreement were limited to any impacts that they'd had in contaminating wells over 70 parts per trillion. So when we talk about some of these terms, the outer boundary is that blue line, the pre-GMZ is depicted by the red line, and then the light blue area is when we talk about this most recent agreement, which Jeff will talk in more detail about, that light blue area is what is referred to in this new agreement as the ring, just for ease of reference. Next slide, Jeff. So on this slide, this is really just obviously we're not trying to show you. I think the format is too small to understand, but this just in total gives you a sense of the significance and the impact and the scope of the impacts from the facility. We've sampled between Saint-Gobain's work and the department's work. Largely the sampling outside the blue line has been conducted by the department, and everything inside the blue line was either by the department or Saint-Gobain. As you can see, we've had many detections of PFOA above the standard. And so essentially, as you look at this, if you look at any dots that are either orange, red, or purple, those red and purple dots represent a well that was sampled and PFOA was detected above the standard. And then the orange dots are ones that are just below the standard. And then the yellow and green were lower detections than that. So that just gives you a sense for the magnitude of the problem. Next slide, Jeff. So I recognize that this slide is pretty dense, but what I want to do is really just quickly go through to give you an idea of sort of the arc of this, how we got to where we are today and how that's happened on the calendar, if you will. So, and it's important to understand that when we lowered the standard from 70 parts per trillion to 12 parts per trillion, which again kind of happened in fits and starts because of the legal proceedings, that really significantly expanded the responsibilities that Saint-Gobain had for sampling inside the consent decree boundary. So again, in July of 19, when we knew when we had completed this rulemaking and the rule that set the standard at 12 and would become effective on September 30th, we wrote to Saint-Gobain requesting a formal work plan for sampling and provision of alternate water, and for basically alternate water for anybody who was tested above the 12 part per trillion standard. So right on the day, the effective date of the new standard, September 30th, we did get a work plan from Saint-Gobain for sampling and provision of alternate water, and their expanded sampling began almost immediately. Unfortunately, within 3 months, that court injunction that I mentioned before that suspended our implementation of the rule and the new standards became effective. And so at that point, sampling was very much curtailed. Saint-Gobain continued, if they'd already made arrangements to sample somebody, they continued doing that, but they stopped sending out access agreements for new sampling while the determination of this this legal matter was being reconciled. So that slowed things down quite a bit. And then when in July of 2020, when the standard was made effective as a matter of law and essentially made the legal proceeding resolved at that point because the law trumped everything that was going on, those new standards did take effect and sampling resumed in earnest after that. And so that, there's been a lot of sampling going in an iterative fashion performed by Saint-Gobain, basically prioritizing their sampling. Whenever they get a detection, they look around the neighboring wells within 500 feet and then identify additional wells for sampling. And that happened. And so back in about 6 months after those standards took effect, we also wrote to the company and requested identification of the areas where alternate water could be implemented in parallel with the sampling. Saint-Gobain was saying they wanted to get everything sampled and then determine what they're going to do for alternate water. And we really felt that there were some areas where it was pretty clear that what needed to be done, if there was a nearby water line that could easily be extended, or even a water line running in front of people's homes, we wanted to see that work proceed in parallel rather than doing this in a serial fashion. So a couple months later, they did respond with an updated timeline, which we had requested, and then indicated that they would request address our request for alternate water implementation under separate cover. And a few months later, in May of 21, they verbally indicated in a phone conversation essentially that they felt they were close to identifying the properties that could be readily remedied in parallel, and that they hoped to have shovels in the ground by the fall of that year. So that was the fall of 21. And unfortunately, that didn't happen. We did begin formal negotiations to make arrangements for the alternate water solutions in August of 2021. And we would have hoped that that would have proceeded more quickly, but for a variety of reasons, we didn't complete those negotiations and complete the agreement until this past month when we made notice of this new agreement that is the subject of this meeting tonight. So that's, again, just to give you a sense for how this thing has unfolded over time. And I wanted to make sure we had provided that information for you. Jeff, the next slide. So at this point, that's a whirlwind tour of how we got to here. And I want to turn it over to Jeff to talk in much more detail about this new agreement for alternate water. And then I'll come back to you for just a few moments, and then we'll go to questions. Jeff?
Thanks, Mike, and thanks everyone for joining us tonight for this discussion. So I'm going to talk about the groundwater sampling and a little bit about the agreement and what that means for permanent alternate water. So the area in the map on the right is the area that's under investigation. That's the consent decree. And this is a typical sampling map that's provided by Golder Associates, which is the environmental consultant for Saint-Gobain. And all of the properties that have some sort of color on this map, which is the vast majority, have been identified as either having been currently served by public water, have been served by waterline extensions that Mike talked about inside the pre-GMZ area, shown in purple, or have been invited to sample, and those are browns and reds. So everybody that's colored brown has been invited to sample, and if a sample result came back over standard, that property is colored red. And if you look closely, there are a few properties in parts of Bedford and down near Hudson and Litchfield that have not yet been identified for sampling, but in total, 3,691 properties have been identified for sampling by Saint-Gobain and their consultants. So those are throughout this sampling area. Of the 3,691 that have been identified for sampling, approximately 2,221 wells have been sampled to date. And of those, 975 exceeded standards, and the property owners have been offered bottled water due to those ambient groundwater quality exceedances for one or more PFAS, with PFOA being the primary contaminant over standard. So Saint-Gobain considers the sampling to be substantially complete. And I think if you look at this image that has colors throughout the area, you know, I would agree that it's largely complete, but not entirely. There are still a few areas that haven't been sampled yet or have been invited to sample. They also include some areas in these areas that have been buffered around contaminant sources or potential contaminant sources that Saint-Gobain and their consultant identified early on. And I just want to let everybody know that today DES issued a letter requiring Saint-Gobain to complete sampling in those buffered areas and these last white remaining areas shown on the map. I get a lot of questions about neighboring wells one being below standard, one being over standard. And what we typically see when we're looking at the PFOA results in the greater ring area inside the consent decree is a really complex distribution of PFAS. So using a similar color scale to what Mike showed earlier, I've zoomed in on a neighborhood and you can see wells that tested up to 50% of our standard for PFOA. So between 0 and 6 are depicted as green dots. Anything that's between 50% of the standard and our standard are shown as yellow and orange. Anything that exceeds our standard of 12 parts per trillion for PFOA are shown as red on this figure. Anything over 70 is shown in purple. But what this demonstrates is that from well to well, you can have quite a bit of variation. And I think that's in part due to changes in air deposition, differences in surficial geology, the bedrock geology, and time-related factors such as changes in the chemicals released over time and seasonal variation. So just briefly, the groundwater flow through our New Hampshire aquifers is rather complex. We have a surficial aquifer, which consists of soil and glacial deposits, so sand and gravel in some cases, sometimes silts and clays. And as PFAS are deposited on the ground and moving through that soil, there's some tendency for the PFAS to stick to the soil particles. So as water infiltrates from the ground through the soil, the concentration of PFOA in that infiltrating water may decrease so that where there's thicker soil, water that eventually enters the fractured rock, so I've depicted that as gray, and in New Hampshire, groundwater flows in cracks in the rock, which I've depicted as these blue lines. The concentration in deeper areas of soil might be lower, so you might have a well that has a lower concentration compared to a well with relatively thin surrounding soils that could be over standard. So moving on to talk about the settlement agreement. So as I said, there's over 900 wells that are over the standard that have been identified by the sampling conducted to date. And I think you can break the settlement agreement into two key provisions. The first provision provides a specific remedy for about 33% of the wells that exceed AGQS. And that lists the properties in a series of attachments that are part of the agreement. That agreement's online. You can take a look at it, read it for yourself. But basically 74 properties under the agreement have been identified as receiving a connection to existing water lines. So these are properties that front an existing water main. A water main runs down the road, and they can be connected to that water line relatively easily. Then Saint-Gobain has proposed connecting 98 additional properties to new water lines, and I'll walk through where those are proposed. And the remainder of the properties, 181, are slated to receive a point of use treatment system. So these systems typically consist of two tanks installed near your pressure tank in the basement. The pressure tank is usually a blue tank near where the well water comes into your house. And these tanks of carbon remove PFAS as the water flows through them. And this would essentially treat all the water that's distributed throughout the interior plumbing of the house. So your kitchen sink would be treated, your shower would be treated, and any sinks that you have in bathrooms. So the second main component of this settlement agreement was a provision that required Saint-Gobain to propose a remedy for the remaining 67%, so roughly 600 wells that exceed ambient groundwater quality standards. And there was a deadline of April 30th. So this past Friday on April 29th, Saint-Gobain, through their attorneys, issued a proposal to our attorneys and DES. And that proposal is currently undergoing legal and technical review, and we won't be discussing the contents of that this evening. So now I'm going to talk about the 33% of properties that are specifically listed. I'm going to go area by area. I'm going to start off with Bedford, and this is in a geographic area that's bound by a county road to the north and areas east of Liberty Hill Road. And this includes 196 properties to be addressed, and 15 of those properties are going to be connected to existing water lines. And those 15 properties on this map are shown as yellow shading. And you can see the water lines are these blue lines. So there's a relatively limited extent of existing water lines in this area. So 15 of those properties, again, are being connected to the existing water lines, while the balance, 181 properties shown with the red, are going to be provided with point of entry treatment systems paid for and installed by Saint-Gobain and their contractors. Moving now to Litchfield, specifically the Hillcrest Road area. There were some nearby water lines that Saint-Gobain is proposing to connect to some of the existing properties. So again, those are shown in yellow. And then 72 properties in this area are going to be connected to brand new water lines that Saint-Gobain and their contractors are going to extend throughout here. Moving on to Merrimack, there are two areas in Merrimack covered by this agreement or specifically spelled out by the agreement. They include the Wildcat Falls area, includes Edward Lane, and some other nearby roads, John Lane. And these areas are going to receive waterline extensions. So properties here are going to be connected to new water lines, or in the case of a handful of properties, connected to existing water lines. So this includes a total of 32 properties addressed, 6 connected to new existing water lines, and 26 connected to new water lines. And I'm showing Brenda Lane. It's not labeled on the inset. So other properties listed in the agreement that are being connected to public water are scattered throughout parts of Bedford, Merrimack, Litchfield, and Londonderry. And those are shown as yellow on this map. And that includes a total of 48 additional properties being connected to existing water lines. Next, I'll talk a little bit about the timeline. So on April 14th of this year, the agreement was signed, and I mentioned April 30th, the proposal was due for the remaining properties that are over standard, so the 600 plus wells that are over standard, and that proposal was received a day early on the 29th. And within 30 days of the signing of the agreement, Saint-Gobain is required to initiate design for water lines and to apply for and obtain any necessary regulatory approvals, and basically have those in place or in the works by June 30th, 2022 of this year. Homeowners who are specified in the agreement, so those properties that are specifically listed in the agreement, should be receiving letters in the coming weeks from Saint-Gobain discussing the particular remedy for their residents. In the case of poets and simpler waterline connections, those are anticipated to begin this summer, and more complex water lines are expected to begin construction in 2023. And it's important to point out that this timeline does not apply to the remaining 600 plus properties that I mentioned, addressed in the April 29th, 2022 proposal that is currently under legal and technical review. That timeline will be forthcoming as we get through the review process on that. So contaminated sites are typically managed in New Hampshire through the use of a groundwater management permit that defines a groundwater management zone. So groundwater management zone is the area that includes the three-dimensional extent of contaminated groundwater. And the groundwater management permit that governs the monitoring of that groundwater in that groundwater management zone specifies ongoing sampling to make sure that wells that are within that zone that are currently below standard don't go over standard in the future and don't need some kind of mitigation. So in a letter dated April 28th, 2022, NHDES requested that Saint-Gobain apply for a groundwater management permit within 120 days. So this is important because once we have a groundwater management permit in place, that will specify ongoing sampling of wells throughout the eventual groundwater management zone. And I'll turn it back to Mike at this point for a discussion of the PFAS removal rebate program.
Thank you, Jeff. So yeah, so we're getting close to the question and answer period here. I just really have one slide. I want to talk about this rebate program. And this is important actually, mostly for folks who are outside the consent decree area, although there may be some people who will meet the criteria who are within it. And basically, we went a few months back, we went to the Drinking Water and Groundwater Trust Fund Advisory Commission, and we requested a $5 million grant from the trust fund to establish a rebate program that would help folks whose wells have been impacted by PFAS to defray the cost of putting on treatment. And we got approval for that program to provide a one-time rebate to any eligible household of up to $1,500 per household for installation of PFAS treatment, and that could be point of use or point of entry at the choice of the party who's going to put it in, or a service connection to an existing water system if that's a practical option. And then we would make folks that the eligibility for that would include folks who going back to September 30th of 2019. And of course, the significance of that date is that's the date when the rules first became effective, that establishing the new standard at 12 parts per trillion. And so anybody who had, in reaction to that had put on treatment anytime after that would be eligible to apply for this rebate. And essentially the basic eligibility criterion would be that your well water exceeds at least one of the four ambient groundwater quality standards for the 4 PFAS compounds. And in this particular area, that's typically going to be PFOA, which would be a standard of 12 parts per trillion. And the second criterion is that you haven't had an offer of alternate water source from a third party. So for those folks who are going to get a waterline connection or a point of entry treatment system from Saint-Gobain under this agreement, they would not be eligible for that. But basically, there are a lot of folks who won't be getting that offer, and we wanted to try to find a solution for those folks as well, and that's why we've sought this rebate program. But I want to also mention that we're currently reviewing options to provide a somewhat more expansive program that would provide a higher reimbursement ceiling than the $1,500. And unfortunately, we haven't accomplished that yet, so I can't really announce that we have that because we don't have it yet. But I want you to know that we're working on that, and as soon as we, assuming that we make some progress on that, we'll certainly be messaging out to all the folks in the area that program is available. The program that we are now approved for is not yet up and running. So what will happen is if we get an opportunity and funding to establish a program with a higher ceiling, that's the program that we will implement. So there will be more to come on that, and we'll let you know. But I thought that with everybody here tonight, I wanted to at least say a few words about it. So with that, I think I'd like to thank you for your attention tonight, and I want to turn it back to our moderators so Jim can explain to you how we're going to do the question and answer session. Jim?
Thank you, Mike. So I just wanted to mention that tonight for our question and answer session, we made quite a few staff available in case there were questions that went beyond the recent agreement that was signed. Our panelists include the people that you see here on the screen. We have Kathy Beam. She's an administrator in our Air Resources Division. Kathy covers a lot of the air emission issues from the Saint-Gobain facility. Brandon Kernan, he's the administrator of our Drinking Water and Groundwater Bureau. Brandon can help answer any questions that people have related to public water systems. Jeff Martz, you already know Jeff from his presentation earlier. We have Dr. Jonathan Patali. He's our toxicologist in our environmental health program here at DES. John can answer questions related to health or PFAS exposure. And Director Wimsat, who also you have already heard earlier tonight. So Jeff, next slide, please. So now is the time that if you would like to have a question answered, you can use the question box in the little box over to the side, the go to webinar panel. All you need to do is put your first and last name. It's also helpful if you put what town that you're from, and we will start developing a queue of people that would like to ask a question, and we will have that posted on our website. So we're just going to take a couple of minutes, let people start putting their names in that list. I show that it's about 11 past 7 right now. We'll start the question and answer session at about 7:15. So we'll just give people a few minutes to put their names in there. Thank you. All right. 7:15. Looks like we have a number of people that have submitted their names to ask questions. I'd like to ask the panelists now to, you can at least open up your cameras, your webcams, so people can see you on the screen. And just ask that you keep your microphone muted until a question is directed to you. All right, so looks like we have Richard Mitchell from Londonderry. We will unmute your line and you'll be able to ask a question.
Yes, I live in the round Boundary and Justin Circle area, and our area is loaded with the PFOA. And I was wondering what they were going to do with this area. I didn't see anything on the form.
Okay, Jeff, can you handle that one?
Sure. So I believe that you're in an area that is part of the other 600 properties that are over standard that are being addressed by the proposal that we just received from Saint-Gobain and their attorneys, and is currently undergoing legal and technical review. So, I can't just get into the details on that tonight.
Okay, one other thing. We're having problem getting water. Every time we call the water people to deliver water, they're telling us that it's 6 weeks out. That seems to be a problem around this area too.
Yeah, so that's a good question. Basically, Saint-Gobain talked to us a year ago and provided a slide that suggested that we should be able to have residents apply or call Monadnock Springs for a resupply, and then that resupply should occur within a period of 2 weeks. So if that's not occurring within a period of 2 weeks, that's outside the what they agreed to. I think the recourse is you could contact me offline. My email address will be shown on a later slide, and ultimately, I think it's important to recognize that it's not Monadnock Springs' responsibility to get your water. It's ultimately rests with Saint-Gobain, and it's their responsibility to provide all residents with a continuous supply of alternate water. So whether it's Monadnock or another contractor, it's Saint-Gobain's responsibility to get this done. So I can follow up with you and any other residents that may be having an issue with bottled water.
Yeah, I'd appreciate that. I'll get in touch with you through your email.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Mitchell. Martha Smith from Londonderry. We'll unmute your line now. Martha, are you there? Have you found Martha, Kate Emma?
Yeah, so, yep, Martha, if you unmute yourself.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Thank you. I don't know if the last guy's question applies to me too, but where I live in Londonderry also. I live on Shasta Drive. So I live about less than half a mile from High Range Road. And the boundary for Londonderry seems to have run down High Range Road and to the west. And and then I've heard other spatterings of neighbors in my neighborhood getting the water from Saint-Gobain, from Monadnock, but that's never been offered to me. The DES has tested my water twice, and both times it came back above the limit. And so I'm not sure what's being done to help me.
Jeff, I think that one's yours again.
All right, Martha, so I understand you're on the east side of High Range Road, so outside of the consent decree. At this time, the DES is not providing bottled water. Nobody's providing bottled water outside of the consent decree area. But what Mike described was a rebate program that would help offset costs for, remedying your well in this case.
Okay, so a follow-up question though is there are neighbors that live up off of Lawson Farm Road, which is right near me as well, on Nutfield, which is also east of the consent decree, and they are getting water.
I know some people may have arranged water delivery on their own. I'm not familiar with anybody receiving bottled water from Saint-Gobain east of High Range Road, so that would be new to me.
It's being delivered by Monadnock, and they're not paying for it. So I don't know who else would be paying for it other than Saint-Gobain.
Yeah, if it's on the east side of High Range Road, I wouldn't know who's paying for that either. I'm not aware of Saint-Gobain providing you water east of High Range. It's all within the consent decree area.
Okay, well, it is happening. I don't know how it's happening, but I'm letting you know it is happening.
Yeah, you know, if you wanted to reach out to your neighbors and ask where it's coming from or who's paying for it, that
I already did, and they told me it was coming from Saint-Gobain and it was coming from Monadnock.
Yeah, I guess if you want to follow up with an email or contact me tomorrow at my contact information, I'd be happy to look into this a little further.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Martha. Next up is Jennifer Kenny from Londonderry.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So my question is probably related to Jeff. I actually had sent him an email probably a couple of years ago with our testing. And I was just curious, should I just assume that I am west of High Range? Should I assume that I am in the 67% that's still in the legal review?
Yeah, if you're receiving bottled water currently from Saint-Gobain or have been offered bottled water and you didn't show up on any of those maps and you're in Londonderry, very good chance that you're going to be included in that other 67% of the proposed remedies.
Okay, if I send you an email with my address, can you confirm that?
We're going to have to work through the legal and review process before I can comment on the specifics of that additional set of properties that are in that proposal.
Okay, and do you know, I know legal reviews can sometimes take weeks. Is there a set timeline as to when that will be complete?
I think at this point we don't have a set timeline, although, you can rest assured this is a very high priority for us here at DES, as well as the New Hampshire Department of Justice to, get this resolved and get a remedy in the work. So, we're going to be working quickly to get this reviewed. And, once we can make it public, that's something we will certainly do. And, we'll probably put an announcement on our website.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, and I think that's an important answer that Jeff just gave. I think that may be the answer that a lot of the people on this list are going to be looking for. So we'll have to see how the rest of the questions go. Next up is Andrew Cutting from Bedford.
Hi, yeah, my name is Andrew Cutting. I live on Grey Rock Road, just across 101 in Bedford, kind of near the Hardy and Jenkins intersection. When I was looking at your map, I noticed that only a very small subset of homes were included in Bedford for either a new point of entry system or the access to some sort of water supply. I wanted to know how that was drawn, and I've had my well tested independently as well as by the state. My results came back more than 5x the acceptable standard. So there are a lot of homes like myself that are outside of this line, and I'm sure it wasn't drawn arbitrarily, but I'd like some more insight as to how that line was drawn. And I mean, nothing was appeared to be looked at kind of on the other side of 101. And obviously I've been impacted pretty dramatically here, probably like most other people on the call and a lot of my neighbors too. So I would like to know if I also exist in that 67%, when the results come back after the legal, review, how will I be notified? And then, furthermore, I appreciate your involvement with getting the rebate, but frankly, I'm looking for safe drinking water, and that doesn't get me halfway to a remedy. So if you could just kind of address that, I'd appreciate it.
So I think those are twofold. Mike, do you want to take some of that question?
Sure. Yeah, and I just want to make sure that I understand. I think what you said is that your home is actually outside the outer boundary. Is that correct, in Bedford? Oops.
Andrew?
I'm not sure if I'm breaking up or you're breaking up. Yeah, my home is outside of the line that I just saw in the presentation. County Road and Liberty Hill, right? And I saw a lot of red dots. I'm sure mine was one of them. I don't live that far from that line. And again, my wells came back both independently and tested by the state at more than 5x the acceptable standard. Why am I outside of that line, and how is that line drawn, and why are a lot of people with a very big problem outside of that perimeter?
Yep, I understand your question. I just want to make sure I understood where you're located. So, yeah,
I'm on Grey Rock Road in Bedford.
Okay, so that's a question we've certainly received a lot, understandably. So that line was negotiated back in 2018 between the state and the company when we were dealing with a 70 part per trillion standard, and we factored in what we thought would be an adequate distance to deal with any potential reductions in the standard. And in the end, the science really brought the standard much, much lower. So we went from 70 to 12. So it's no secret. Everybody can see by looking at the map that, and if we look at the work that's been done to model this contamination, we know we have many, many wells outside that outer boundary of the consent decree that are impacted, where we attribute the contamination to those airborne emissions. So that means that there are a lot of people who have wells impacted who are not, for whom Saint-Gobain doesn't have a responsibility under this agreement to provide a remedy. Now, I want to make sure everybody understands, that's a negotiated agreement between the state and the company. So the state did not negotiate away anybody's individual rights to deal with the contamination. And so folks, if they wish, can approach Saint-Gobain about a remedy, even though they're outside the consent decree boundary. Understanding, however, that can be a big lift for people. We are working very hard on developing solutions for people outside the boundary. And one of those solutions was is the rebate program that I described earlier. And understanding that many people at $1,500, pretty confident that people could get a point of use treatment system installed and up and running, for well under that amount. But we also recognize that many people may want a point of entry treatment system that treats their whole house water, or they may be close enough to a water line that they want to, arrange for their own connection to a water line. So we're working on developing a solution that includes additional funding to provide a higher ceiling for reimbursement under that rebate program. And I wish I could tell you we're going to get that, and we got the number tonight. I'm optimistic about it, but we don't have it done yet. So we're going to have to wait a little bit to see how that sort of sugars off. But our goal is to develop and implement a rebate program very broadly that would provide for folks like you who are outside the consent decree boundary an opportunity to put a whole house system on, if they want to do that, a point of entry treatment system, and be reimbursed for the cost of doing so.
Yeah, I would, and I'll just wrap up by saying this, I would welcome that. I have, a family, and I think safe drinking water is paramount. That's why we're discussing this today. I do have a quote from Skillings, and it's twice that amount to get it done. So I would welcome a more robust rebate program for those outside of that boundary. I also think that boundary is probably a bit dated. I mean, I'm no expert, but we have 4 years of data since that decree was defined. And it seems like with all the my well was tested after that, as a matter of fact. So with all these new data points, it just seems like maybe that data is outdated, for lack of better terms. And I think a lot of people are being left out. So maybe that rebate, a more robust rebate program would help a lot of us. But I think going off data that's 4 years old just to help some people is probably not enough for me. But thank you for the information tonight.
Well, understand that we continue to collect data, and there will be continued monitoring. We're not trying to use 4-year-old data to make decisions today, but you have to understand that consent agreement, which was entered into in 2018, is durable. It doesn't expire. So that's just the reality of it. But we're doing everything we can to try to develop solutions for everybody, regardless of where their home is located.
Sure. Thanks for your time.
Well, thanks for your question. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Andrew. Next up is Joshua Sobozensky. Joshua, are you unmuted?
Yes, I'm going to piggyback off of Andrew. So going back to this dissent decree, or the decree area, I'm on Hall Road in Londonderry, which I believe is outside of that. So there's no way to feasibly expand that area as new data comes in? It's kind of locked in where it was back in 2018. Is that accurate?
Yeah, Mike, you want to explain the legal nature of that?
Sure. Yeah. So basically, what would have to happen in order to change that boundary would be that both the state and Saint-Gobain would have to agree to expand the boundary to a further distance. And as you can imagine, the state would be more than willing to do that.
Yeah.
I can't speak for Saint-Gobain.
Has anybody successfully outside of the area that you're aware of gotten Saint-Gobain to pay for treatment?
I don't know the answer to that. I'm not aware of anyone.
Okay. You should imagine, is it like you said?
I wouldn't necessarily know, so I don't want to make that as a declarative statement.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Joshua. Next up, Brian Tomaselli from Merrimack.
Hi, it's Nicole and Brian. We're both here. Can you hear us?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so we're in a little bit of a different situation. We live near Joppa Road in the northwest corner of Merrimack. We were hooked up to town water. Our street is, small street, probably 11 houses, all on private wells. We all tested, like you had said earlier, at varying rates, which is kind of fascinating. But since we have small children, or had them at the time, we decided to put in our own point of entry treatment system. We got multiple quotes. It did end up costing us, even though we did it ourselves and pieced it together, it cost us well over $2,000 to put in a whole home filtration system. So I just wanted people to know that $1,500 is not going to cover it likely for your home, even if you were to do it yourself. But then we were offered water down our street. So I do feel very fortunate that we were offered water from Monadnock for several months, which we took. And then water was brought down our streets. And we're now hooked up to the Merrimack Village District, which I do have concerns about the ongoing testing of that water. Probably those questions should go towards Brandon, I think. But the piece that I think is very important to note here is that when you do get hooked up to these public systems, you're stuck with that bill. So we now have a quarterly water bill that maybe 10 years ago would have been nothing, but our bill is over $80 a quarter, which, in the scheme of things, it's well worth it to have clean water. However, we do have several elderly neighbors on our street, and this is not a bill that is going down because the cost for MVD is skyrocketing. So, and those costs are being relayed to their customers. So I'm curious if this rebate can be used to pay our water bills. And furthermore, I'd really like the water bills just to kind of be paid for by Saint-Gobain in perpetuity. Like we've already put our money into our filtration system, and we have to maintain those and pay for filters. But the water bill piece of this is significant.
So Mike, can you address the water bill question?
Sure. Yeah, and I understand. I'm sympathetic to your concerns about that. I will tell you that, even before this incident, the state has always had, or for many years has had, a requirement that a party who causes someone's well to be contaminated needs to provide alternate water. And the approach to that has always been that if it's plausible and feasible to get a water line connection, that's preferred. And when that is done, the responsible party is expected to pay all the costs of getting the water line connected and complete, and the connection completed in the home, but has not been held responsible for ongoing water bills. And that's just the way that it has been done. And from an implementation standpoint, that would be, I think, very difficult for the agency to administer that on an ongoing basis. And in some respects, really would probably serve as a disincentive for responsible parties to do what they need to do. Now, if they provide point of entry treatment, they do have a responsibility to maintain that on an ongoing basis. But
can I ask,
sure.
How is that different? How is that different that maintenance is going to be, the cost of that ongoing maintenance is going to be absorbed by this solution, but our ongoing costs are not?
A lot of people don't look at it this way, but they think if they have a well, if they don't have treatment, that their water is free. And of course, anybody who pays attention to what they do with their well over the life of the well finds out it really isn't. You have to replace pumps. You may have trouble with your well. You may have to redevelop it at some point. I'm not sure I can debate with you that. All I can tell you is that that is how our program has always been implemented. And I think that there are a lot of reasons why it's implemented that way. It doesn't, when you get a water bill, it doesn't feel fair. But what I think you'll find is that on the upside, having a connection to a public water system when you didn't have one before increases the value of your home. It provides you, it's the most effective way to ensure that you have safe, clean drinking water for the future, because you're now connected to a regulated public water system that's required to deliver you water that meets the standards. So there are a lot of advantages to that. I know I'm not going to convince you that it's fair, but all I can say is that that's how we implement the program. And I think if we look at it the way it's implemented across the state for all the sites that we manage, it's been very effective in ensuring that people get clean, safe water.
I would just also had another question, that we did install our filter, our whole home filter, in December 2017, because at that point, this had been going on for quite a while, and I didn't know if the standards would ever be lowered. For a long time there, we were talking about 70 parts per trillion, which is just unacceptably high. And then with all the litigation, we just didn't want to wait. I'm curious why, and I know you said earlier something about the law changing in, I forget the year, I think it was 2019, but I would very much like to submit for a rebate for our expenses we've already incurred, but I'm not sure why that can't happen.
And you have been provided with a water line connection by Saint-Gobain, is that correct?
They brought, public water did come down our street, yep. But prior to that, I put in a whole house filter because this took years.
I understand.
We were having contaminated water since 2016, and the line probably came down our street, I would say maybe two summers ago.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't want to monopolize too much time, but I do want people to understand that when you get hooked up, you're getting hooked up to a water bill for the rest of your stay at that property.
I understand that. And we'd be happy to talk with you about this offline, and we can evaluate whether there's any eligibility for your situation.
Thank you. I appreciate all of your work. Thanks.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. Marcia Salvatore from Londonderry.
Marcia, you should be able to be off of mute right now.
Marcia, can you unmute yourself? Maybe we'll have to come back to Marcia. Marcia, we will come back to you, but we're going to move on now to Ryan Ewing from Bedford.
Hi, Ryan Ewing here from Bedford. Thank you all for taking the time. I do appreciate it. So first, I just want to mention that I am in the ring, but I'm part of the area where you haven't, or I guess the decision has not yet been made whether I'll be supplied with public utilities or a point of entry treatment system. I understand that Saint-Gobain is responsible, if they go with a point of entry treatment system, to install it, and then for a period of time, they will maintain it for us, but then that becomes our responsibility. And, you know, when it was presented that, you know, a POET system could be the result, in my mind, I thought, okay, if there's an isolated home in a certain area where, you know, they're not near other wells that have been affected, maybe a POET system is the most appropriate. But, you know, I'm seeing these highly concentrated areas on the map in Bedford, 181 homes, and they're all getting POET systems when, you know, I think public utilities could be a solution. So, you know, I'm interested in getting a better understanding of how the decisions are being made and who gets a point of entry system and versus who gets public utilities. And Mike, you just mentioned it, you know, public utilities, that increases your home. Sure, you have a water bill, but that increases the value of your home. Where if I were to go sell my home someday and I say, hey, I have a POET system in my basement because my well has poison in it, you know, I think that's going to negatively impact my home's value. So I would just like a better understanding of how those decisions are being made and who gets what remedy. Thanks.
I think that's for Director Wimstad again.
Sure. Yeah, so thanks for your question, Ryan. So yeah, this is an issue that we understand a lot of folks are going to have questions about, and different people fall on different sides of it in terms of what's important to them. So it is certainly true in the early going here, we really highly emphasized extension of public water. And for those who have followed this since 2016, you know that there was extensive, you know, miles of pipe that were extended to extend the water system in Litchfield and in parts of Bedford and in Merrimack. And, you know, under the state rules that govern this, there's an expectation that the agency will, you know, require a responsible party who contaminates someone's well to provide alternate water. And so that's essentially a remedy for the contamination that they have, part of a remedy for the contamination that they've caused. And when that remedy is selected, the agency is bound to evaluate a number of factors to determine what is an acceptable remedy. And one of those includes effectiveness and durability, but also cost effectiveness. And again, in the early going here, we really pressed hard, you know, for what we call the gold standard, which is connection to a public water system. And the early work did include a lot of public water systems and not much in the way of POETs. I think we've undergone a little bit of an evolution in the process for our evaluation of that over the years here. As you know, this thing is maturing. We're 6 years into this crisis. And you know, one of the things we got, there were a lot of people who were disappointed that they were going to be connected to water, as we heard a previous caller, you know, concerned about having to pay a water bill for all time, and who said that, and a lot of those folks said we'd much rather have a POET system that's required to be maintained by Saint-Gobain. So we see both sides of this, and at the end of the day, when the company comes to us with proposed solutions for individual homes, we have to weigh all those things to determine, you know, what is an acceptable solution under the law. And so for what Jeff has presented tonight, we reviewed that material and reviewed that information and determined that what's been proposed is approvable. And that's why it was made officially part of the agreement and has been published, if you will, in the agreement. For the remaining 650 plus or minus homes, we have received Saint-Gobain's proposal for that. Again, it's under legal review, so we will, you know, that, and once we've reviewed that, we'll make it, you know, obviously make it public, and then it'll be implemented. So I think that no matter what we do here, we're going to make some people unhappy. Some people that very much want to be connected to a water system that aren't going to be connected to a water system aren't going to be happy. And some people who are slated for a poet that would rather be, or slated for a water line connection that would rather have a poet, they're not going to be happy either. And unfortunately, it's just that we have to apply the law and apply the rules here and make decisions about what's approvable.
Okay, I think that's valid. I do appreciate it. I think that you probably could have asked and seen what the preference was. I was certainly never asked what I would have preferred in my home. And I understand that cost effectiveness always comes into play, but at the end of the day, it's not our money, right? It's money that belongs to the people who caused this issue. So if there's a standard, the golden standard's what you want to meet, then I don't think there should be any restrictions on what it takes to get there. So I guess one Bedford resident that supports public utilities as you review the the most recent disclosure from Saint-Gobain.
Okay, thank you, Ryan. Jeff, did you have a point?
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in. Ryan mentioned that the ongoing maintenance of these poets, and one thing I didn't get into, I didn't want to talk too long on my introduction, but one provision in the agreement specifies how long Saint-Gobain has to maintain these systems, and basically it's until water is raw water coming out of a well meets standards. So if the water coming out of the well still contains PFOA over our standard, they have to continue to maintain that system. And then once it drops below standard, they have to continue to test it for a period of time. And I believe it's 3 years of annual testing to demonstrate that it's staying below standard or exhibiting a downward trend in the concentration of PFOA. So there is a responsibility for the responsible party, in this case, Saint-Gobain, to continue to maintain these systems as long as drinking water exceeds standard.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jeff. Let's try Marcia Salvatore again. Can we get Marcia to be unmuted?
Marcia, you should be all set. Marcia, if you're talking, we can't hear you. If you want to try to toggle your mute one more time. There you go.
Marcia? Oh, unfortunately, it seems like Marcia's having some technical difficulties. We're going to have to move on to Joan Glynn from Londonderry.
Hi, this is Joan Glynn. Thank you for taking my call. I'm in the consent decree area, and I'm assuming that in Londonderry, and I'm assuming that my well will be mitigated some way by these mitigation reports or whatever. I'm sorry. So is that right? And I'm assuming that mine will get fixed.
Jeff, do you want to handle that?
Yeah, if you've been offered bottled water by Saint-Gobain, you should very much be included in one of these two proposals.
Okay. And now what if you're in the consent decree area and you have already put in a point of entry system? Is there any way that outgoing money can be reimbursed?
Mike, I think that was already brought up earlier by another caller. I think that is something that's going to have to be considered. Is that right, Mike?
Yeah, that's a hard question. That's something I think we're going to have to take up, with each individual party, because it may be. I'm not sure that's going to work, but it's going to be dependent on individual circumstances. So I think that's probably a hard thing for us to talk about on this call, but I'd encourage you to reach out to Jeff. We'll look at your particular situation, try to figure out how this fits for you.
Okay, great. Okay, Thank you.
I will say, if I could, at the very least, if you already have a treatment system that you put on and you were offered, let me ask, were you offered bottled water by Saint-Gobain at one point?
This is my neighbor who did this, and no, she asked for water for Saint-Gobain, and that she was refused.
Well, that's again, I don't want to sort of litigate this on the call with everybody.
Yeah.
But if it may be that she was refused because she wasn't above the standard.
She was above the standards. Yeah.
Then presumably there was some other reason. So we'll look at that. That we can look. I would encourage her to reach out to Jeff directly, and we'll look at her situation and try to help her.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thanks for the question.
All right, thank you, Joan. Nancy Lavin from Bedford.
Yes, hi. My question is, what happens to the houses that are at the limit? If my well is at 12, I'm not shown as being on the list of houses to be remediated, although the vast majority of houses on my street are. When my water was first tested in May of 2021, I was at 10. When it was tested in September, I was at 12. So I do not feel confident that I will stay at the limit. I suspect that I will be over the limit. So how is that monitored? Is the state tracking? You know, what happens to the edge cases?
Jeff?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So I think your well is a perfect example of what I was talking about earlier about the groundwater management zone that we asked Saint-Gobain to apply for in 120 days. And basically what that means is that there's going to be a groundwater management permit. And as part of that permit, there are going to be conditions. And the conditions are going to include that wells such as yours, which is very close to the limit, continue to be sampled on some periodic basis to make sure that it doesn't go higher and that you don't require treatment in the future. So that's why, you know, we feel that it's very important that we move this project to the point of having a groundwater management permit in place with a monitoring schedule for wells such as yours that are close to the standard.
Okay, as a follow-up question then, what would be a reasonable retest time frame, considering that, you know, we jumped 10 to 12 within less than 6 months? Is it recommended that this testing be done every 6 months? Or will we have to wait until this plan comes out to find out what's going to be done?
So the way these are typically done is that we receive a proposal from the environmental consultant as to what they recommend. But, you know, I think in a case where you're that close to the standard, you know, certainly yearly or twice a year seems like a reasonable timeframe to collect a new sample.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, Nancy. Looks like Amy Doherty is going to ask the question from Marcia Salvatore. She was able to just type it into the box.
Hi, good evening. So Marcia's question is, I live within the consent decree and am receiving bottled water. My address is not currently on the list for Londonderry. Can I assume that I am included in the address for the legal review? How will I be notified of this?
That's for you, Jeff.
Yeah, I think that's a correct assumption, and that once we've completed our review, we'll make that public. And you know, I would expect that Saint-Gobain would follow up with letters to individual residents detailing, you know, what their proposed remedy is going to be.
Okay, thank you, Jeff.
Jim, she has a follow-up question. I'd like to offer. She says, I've contacted my town offices about the rebate. I was told that because I am within the consent decree that I do not qualify for the rebate. Is that correct?
That would be correct. So if she's been offered bottled water by Saint-Gobain, then she would not qualify for the state rebate program.
All right, good. All right, thank you, Amy, for coordinating that. Let's move on to Michael Strand from Bedford.
Michael, if you're able to try and unmute yourself.
We can't hear you at the moment, Michael.
Okay, it looks like I'm unmuted now. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So quick question, are there any legal stipulations for residents outside of the consent decree to accept the $1,500 rebate, specifically pursuant to any future individual or class action legally?
Mike, do you understand that question?
I think so, yeah. And I guess the simple answer is we're looking to set up a rebate program. I'm not qualified. I don't have any reason to believe that it would somehow necessarily disadvantage somebody for any other future legal actions, but that's not something that I'm qualified to opine on. And if you had concerns about that, it probably makes sense to talk with your own counsel about that.
Okay, I appreciate that. I think, the concern also stems from, just given the nature of hydrology, the likelihood that contaminated zones will continue to expand and, MCLs, based on, professional and public health opinion, will likely go down over time,
It's certainly possible, yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
All right.
Could I ask one more quick thing? I'm sorry, guys.
Yes, please.
So as part of this, additional or alternative agreement, is there any provision for, towns that might have significant portions of contaminated wells, that, aren't easily connected to existing, public water infrastructure? Is there any provision for, possibly access to that state fund in order to cover broader costs of extending larger areas of public water infrastructure from a town level and not just individual residences or streets?
Sure, you're talking about areas outside the consent decree, right?
Yes, sir.
Right. So we're not really, it's not really the topic of tonight's meeting, but it's a great question. So there's a lot of money available, public money available through the state revolving funds and clean water grants. Some money's directed from EPA directly at PFAS and other emerging contaminants. There are a lot of opportunities right now for towns or communities that wish to stand up a water system, particularly if part of the reason for that is to address contamination problem. So we are working with a number of communities and locations where we're doing exactly that, looking to use whatever public funding is available to help incentivize and support efforts to expand water systems. So there's a lot of that going on right now. If you live in a place where you think your community is interested in doing that, I would encourage you to reach out to your town officials, and they should be, if they're interested, they should be reaching out to DES because there are a lot of opportunities for that.
Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Derek O'Connor from Bedford.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right, so my question kind of goes off what Nancy was saying. So I tested at 11 and then 12, and then I spoke with people from Golder, and they said that they are not required to retest the well more than the one time that they did. And they told me it's $200 to $500 to retest through an independent lab. I can then get the results and submit them to the DES, which you guys would then submit them to, I guess, Saint-Gobain or whoever, or Golder, to get me on some sort of program. So my question is, with that rebate being on the 11 or 12 sort of mark, the threshold, could I pay out of pocket and then say it comes back at 15? Well, now I can get reimbursed or move forward, or how would that work considering Saint-Gobain or Golder is only required to resample once?
Jeff, can you address that?
Yeah, so eventually the groundwater management zone is going to require ongoing sampling of wells such as yours. So while Golder is not immediately sampling wells, I guess, beyond the second time, that's going to change. And we have a requirement that they submit that application for the groundwater management permit in 120 days. So, we should have an application, and that should lay out a framework for how your well is going to be resampled going forward. In terms of the rebate is only eligible for people that are over the standard. So you wouldn't qualify for the rebate at a concentration of 11 or 12. And if you did go over the standard, presumably you qualify for alternate water provided by Saint-Gobain. So you wouldn't qualify for the rebate program in that case either.
Okay, so we'll say, 120 days they have to get back and say what they're going to do. I guess a lot can happen in that time frame, right? As Nancy said, within a few months, hers went up, and we can only assume it's going to keep going up considering my neighbors are at, I know you already went over that slide, but my neighbors are at 30 and 50 and 20, which they're also not on any list to get, their water connected or whatnot. But my question would be, is someone going to be held accountable in the sense of, in 120 days they say this is what we're going to do? Does that mean immediately they're going to start resampling, or is it going to be we're going to resample within the next 12 months and then, it's kind of lost time?
Yeah, I don't think sampling is going to begin immediately at that 120-day mark. That's when we're expecting to receive a proposal for the groundwater management zone. We also recognize that this groundwater management zone for Saint-Gobain is going to be completely unprecedented in New Hampshire and probably New England in terms of the size and scope. I think our typical sites that are managed under these permits might involve, anywhere from 0 to 10 or 15, and maybe in some greater cases, more wells, but generally measured in the tens of wells. Whereas, this groundwater management zone is going to include thousands of wells. So I think there are going to be some practical considerations to figure out how that is going to be implemented and managed. And, I don't think sampling is going to begin on day 121, unfortunately.
Dr. Patali, do you want to address their concerns about, going for, maybe 12 months without, having anything done on their water? At that level, they're talking at like 10 parts per trillion to 12 parts per trillion.
Yeah, so the 12 parts per trillion that was established as our MCL and our AGQS is a threshold that's based on the most sensitive individuals in the population. So in this case, we identified women of childbearing age who would be drinking the water for between 10 to 30 years consistently, and would be high-end water consumers, so individuals that consume a large amount of water. Those are the sensitive individuals that this standard is aimed at protecting. If you are drinking water with PFAS, you do have some exposure, just like you have exposure from a lot of consumer products, other things in the environment. But as far as like going a few months where you're sort of bouncing back and forth between 13, 9, when you're around in that range, you're not going to get as much accumulation. So there is still the goal of reducing exposure. And again, that 12 is based on the individuals that are the most sensitive in the population. So by setting that threshold, we protect for everyone. So again, like depending on what your results are, if you want to get a sense of, based on like your water usage and the individuals in the household and sort of residence time, my contact information will also be available on the slide if you want to talk through some of those individual results. But again, it will kind of come back to just keeping an eye on that with doing that monitoring and seeing what those concentrations will be. Jeff can sort of fill us in on any information as far as the fluctuations that we see. I haven't seen situations where someone goes from being 11 or 10 parts per trillion and then they shoot up to 70 in a few week period. That just isn't really something that I've seen in the sites I've been looking at, but Jeff can correct me if there's...
I'm just going to pop in real quick. I guess what I'm going to say is I understand the women of childbearing age and whatnot, but what about, our children who can't be advocates for themselves, like my son who's 3, my daughter who's 1, and they're forced to drink sort of this water. And I know I can go spend the money and get bottled water because Saint-Gobain can't provide it. So now I have to go buy the water. So, I mean, it's kind of, to identify one thing and leave out a whole other group is, I guess it just doesn't make sense to me.
Well, no, and just to be clear, it's when we looked at setting that standard, it's those women of childbearing age with long-term exposure are more sensitive than those smaller children. And I know that intuitively doesn't make sense to folks, but That's one of the things with these chemicals, with how they're bioaccumulative. We're more concerned about that transfer, that a woman can transfer these into a fetus and then through breast milk. Whereas for small children, because they're growing, they actually get a bit of a dilution effect at these levels. So as their body mass grows, these concentrations, the standard, that 12 threshold, is based on the most sensitive group, which in this case isn't children for this. And I know that it doesn't intuitively make sense to say that, but that's one of the things we went through and looked at the science. It's why we recommended this lower number, was because of that protection of women of childbearing age, because they may transfer these into a fetus and through breast milk.
Thank you. Nancy Murphy from Merrimack.
My questions. The first thing I wanted to say is somebody had mentioned that water delivery timeframes are not being met. And I know that remains a problem for some residents who've been advised in the past to notify DES. And I know there was some, Monadnock was having a hard time keeping up with the water supply, but I know that this is Saint-Gobain's issue, and I think that that's something that maybe DES can sort of get back to them again and say this certainly remains a problem. The other thing that I was going to ask about was I know Mike had mentioned something before when he was discussing about the $1,500 rebate, that some homeowners inside the consent decree may be eligible for that rebate. But my understanding was it was only those outside the CD. So I just wondered if I could get clarification about who inside the CD would be eligible for that. And then I have a couple of other things I wanted to say.
Sure. Thank you. Nice to hear from you, Nancy. So the reason I said that is that, and then we're still, this program is still taking shape, but the eligibility criterion is that if you have been offered alternate water by a third party, which in this case would be inside the consent decree, would likely be Saint-Gobain, then you wouldn't be eligible. But there are some areas of contention where there are impacted wells where Saint-Gobain has not yet taken responsibility for addressing those wells. And I think Jeff made mention of those in his description of the study area. So it's possible, and again, we're still trying to figure out what this program looks like, that folks, at least for our position is that anybody who is impacted inside the consent decree whose contamination we attribute to Saint-Gobain, regardless of where inside the consent decree they're located, that the company is responsible for providing alternate water. They agree with us in most areas, but there are a few areas of contention. So what I was trying to suggest is that in those areas of contention, if when this all sort of sorts out, if there are people who are above the standard, who are not provided with alternate water from Saint-Gobain, they would potentially be eligible for the rebate program.
Great. Thank you, Mike. Thank you. Yep, that explains it to me. The other thing that I was just going to mention for any Merrimack residents that are listening, I would suggest that they not apply to the state's $1,500 grant reimbursement program, as there will be a town PFAS rebate program available with a much higher reimbursement level. So and since you can only receive funding from one of those, for Merrimack residents, it would behoove them to wait for that. And I think it may be August or September before that will happen. But just wanted to mention that. And the only other, actually, I had two other things quickly was, one was, I think a lot of the questions raised tonight reflect on an issue that continues to be a concern to impacted communities. And that is that so many decisions are made about us, without us, that leave us, in terms of citizens here, with the financial burdens of those decisions. I mean, I'm talking in terms of just that outer boundary, the consent decree agreement, the remedy options. I mean, people certainly, we didn't cause this. Citizens feel that they didn't create this problem, and then looking for, they have an expectation that the person, the entity that contaminated the wells have to provide the remedy, but then don't really have the choice about the remedy, and decisions are made and the impacted well owners don't have any say. So if there's certainly any way that DES can take into consideration the thoughts and the input that so many of these impacted homeowners have. If there's a way to do that, before agreements with Saint-Gobain, I feel pretty strongly and pretty confident that people would really like to be heard, because I think that's sort of what you're hearing tonight. And then the last thing was there was, and this actually there's a road here in Merrimack that is outside the consent decree area that I've had a lot of phone calls from. It's Palmieri Drive. It's right off of Natticook. And there are multiple homes on that road, and multiple people with cancers that are really concerned about that neighborhood and are just wondering, whether or not that's going to they're going to have access to maybe hooking up to public water, because it's right at the end of the road. But that's outside the CD, so I'm guessing that's a no. And that's all. Thank you.
Okay. Jeff, do you want to take that last one?
Yeah, I guess from the standpoint of Saint-Gobain, extension of public water outside the consent decree is not an option, but I think I'll turn that over to Mike to see if there's any other opportunities from some of the other funds that are potentially available.
Thanks, Jeff.
Yeah, so with regard to your last question, Nancy, that to the extent that, and I'll talk about it in the abstract because it's a little easier. If you have an area that's outside the consent decree where public water is nearby and there are a number of people who would want to connect, do a small extension and connect to that water supply line, it's theoretically possible they could get together, figure out what that's going to cost, and either look for public funding like I talked about before about extension of water systems, or also access the rebate program. If we are able to stand up a rebate program with a higher reimbursement ceiling, particularly for connecting to a water line, there may be an opportunity to make something like that work. So I'd say anything could be on the table with that. What we're hoping to do is stand up a rebate program that really provides for the individuals that are accessing it to make their own decision about what level. I mean, many people may, in many cases, a simple low-cost point-of-use treatment system and under the kitchen sink can solve the most of the concerns about quality of drinking water. But there are relatively inexpensive point-of-use systems that can do a very effective job of removing PFAS from drinking water. And if that's a person's main concern, that's an option. If they want, and I can understand that a lot of people want their whole house water to meet standards for PFAS, then a point of entry treatment system. And we're hoping to have a higher ceiling in the rebate program that will allow enough money to pay for the full cost of a point of entry treatment system. All the way on up to, if there are, and again, there are fewer homes in this category because there are not that many that are necessarily properly positioned to an existing water line. But to the extent that your home is in a situation like that, we'd like there to be, a reimbursement ceiling under the rebate program that would allow you to make that connection to a water system if that's what your choice is.
Thank you, Mike.
Great. Welcome. All right, thanks, Mike. Amy, can you bring up the list again? I got to see who's next on the list. Richard Weir from Londonderry.
Can you folks hear me now?
Yep.
Good evening. We're currently in the decree area within Londonderry, and we're currently in the process of putting the house on the market. And we were under the understanding we were going to have a solution hopefully last week. So my question is really from a direction perspective, because we're back under a legal review, I don't have an answer, and I won't be able to get a resolution most likely before the house goes on the market. Is my understanding correct?
Well, yeah, so I want to say, if you're currently being offered bottled water by Saint-Gobain, is that correct?
That's correct, and we're in the decree area.
So that means it should be safe to assume that your house is in play, if you will, in this latest submittal. And really, there's really only two options. The house would either be identified for a connection to a water line or connection for a point of entry treatment system. And until we complete the legal review and make public these proposed solutions, we won't be able to tell you what the answer to that is. I will tell you, I can't make any promises about timing, but we do not anticipate a long period of time for completing this review and making these public.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you. Elena Zook from Bedford, New Hampshire. Elena, can you unmute yourself?
There we go.
Yep, thank you.
First of all, a clarifying question. So you mentioned the consent decree. Is that the area within the blue line on the map or within the red line?
Jeff?
It's within the blue line.
It's everything within the blue line. Okay, so if you're within the consent decree, it's anything within the blue line, but you're saying that a portion of those houses, like 600 or whatever the number was, is still being determined what will be done?
That's correct. We have a proposal that was received through council for those, I think it's about 650 homes remaining where a specific remedy has not been announced yet. And that's undergoing legal review now. And then once we're confident that it's final, we'll go ahead and release that information. And that information would ostensibly, unless there are areas of contention that still need to be worked out through negotiation, then that would include the list for all those homes and what their remedy is, whether it's a water line connection or a point of entry treatment system.
Okay. And then unrelated, but follow-up question. Is there any resource available for those that have gone through a pregnancy while being exposed to high PFAS levels without knowing that this was an issue until wells were tested?
Dr. Patali, can you answer that?
Yeah, so there's some information that you can find. It's on the website for the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry. That's a mouthful of a name. So if you just want to find my contact information at the end of the presentation, you can contact me and I can directly share that to you. We can also have a follow-up conversation about some of those resources. I will say that a lot of the resources right now for like clinicians is very limited. This is something that, working with our sister agency, the Department of Health and Human Services, we do recognize there's a limited amount of resources. A lot of physicians sometimes struggle with understanding the terms around PFAS. It can be new to them if you bring that up, but there are some resources for discussing that. So again, if you want to get some more information about that, I would say you can either go to their website, or if you want to follow up with me afterwards, I can talk with you more specifically about some of the health questions that you have and try to find the best match for those resources.
Okay, and will the contact information be shared via email as well, if some of us have to drop before the meeting is over?
The recording of this is going to be posted on our website, so you can also find the contact information there.
Okay, thank you.
And I also just say, like, for most of us here, if you just Google NHDES and our name will pop up and our contact information should be there.
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you. Jerry Hanauer from Bedford.
Thank you. I'm unmuted. By the way, I'm the same person as number 24, so I'll ask my questions now. You can eliminate number 24. Can we get copies of tonight's slideshow? Is it online? Can we draw it down? Can we get it online?
Yeah, so the recording of this presentation, which will include the slideshow, will be posted on the DES PFAS webpage.
Thank you. And by the way, thank you all for what you're doing. I understand there are unfairnesses from different people's point of view, but I certainly appreciate the work you people are doing. Another question is, I'm just wondering, I'm one of those people who is scheduled for a point of entry treatment system. Can you tell me about the effectiveness of that system? I don't know anything about them. Are they a proven system? What do we know about it? Hopefully I can be happy about it, but I don't know anything about them. How effective are they in eliminating PFAS, PFOS?
Is Brandon Kernan still on?
Yeah.
Hi, Brandon.
So, we have a lot of experience in New Hampshire, and there's also some experience in Vermont and New York with these point of entry treatment systems. It usually involves a couple vessels of carbon, and they've been proven to be very effective for removal of the long chain compounds for a long time. Any point of entry treatment system requires maintenance to continue to be effective and ongoing sampling. And often sampling will be between the two vessels. So you detect if one vessel is starting to have a breakthrough and letting contaminants through. You still have the second one that would catch anything. But no, they're very effective. And even on our one-stop website, there's various reports about the point of entry systems that currently exist in the area and their designs and the testing results. And so, yeah, we have a lot of confidence in their effectiveness for PFOA.
How often do the filters need to be changed in a typical home? Do you know?
I believe the resin, or the carbon, I should say, is lasting 1 to 2 years, often being changed out just to refresh it so you don't have bacteria concerns, not because it's failing to remove PFOA. And so it's an extended period of time for the longer chain compounds.
Thank you. Kind of one more quick question. This doesn't really affect me personally, but I'm wondering to what extent are public water supplies that people are connecting to, have they been monitored for PFAS and PFOA because of what's happening?
So public water systems have to routinely sample for PFAS, the four that we regulate, that we have MCLs for, as well as all the other MCLs that are established out there. And if there's an exceedance, they have to notify the public within a relatively short period of time so they know about it, and they have to mitigate the exceedance. Really, the public water systems are very heavily regulated, a lot of oversight, very transparent, the data is readily available. And so they consistently meet standards once they have treatment, is our experience.
So you haven't seen any contamination from the Saint-Gobain's source in public water supplies, is that right?
Well, that's not the case. I mean, since 2016, we started sampling private and public wells and identifying where there were elevated levels. And with public water systems, once we had standards, they had to develop a corrective action plan and install treatment. But while that's occurring, they're notifying their customers about the exceedance so the customers can take appropriate action. But going forward, because New Hampshire's been so proactive, really ahead of the rest of the nation in making standards, our systems will meet, we'll have very low PFAS levels in them and meet our state standard because we're required to by law, and meet the federal standard, be way ahead of any federal standard when that comes out in a year or two. And so, yeah, initially there are exceedances because we had a standard before other people did. But the good news is they have been dealt with all the while. It's been very transparent with the public about what the levels are and actions people should take until that treatment's in place. MVD is a great example. Every single well for Merrimack Village District exceeded the state standard, and the MVD really rose to the occasion and voted to put treatment on all the wells, turn off some wells temporarily, and buy water from a source that has lower levels of PFAS. And ultimately, though, by the end of this year, all their active wells will have treatment that they have online. There's a couple of wells that'll still be offline, and easily meet state standards for PFOA.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Jerry. Bob Feldman from Londonderry.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So kind of a different question than most people have been asking. My understanding is we're not supposed to drink or cook with water if we've been tested over the limit. What about vegetable garden or in general local agriculture? You mentioned earlier that the transport mode is over the air and therefore it's coming down in the rain. Is that an issue? Is that something we should be concerned about?
Dr. Patali, can you take that one?
Yeah, sure. So right now, there's still a lot of studies going on in the New England region, but also across the country to understand what the uptake of these chemicals looks like into agricultural products. Some people on the call may be familiar that there's a lot of activity going on in Maine because of how they handled certain biosolids materials and how that impacted farms. At this point, we haven't done testing of specific agricultural products here in the state. There's, as I mentioned, certain research projects that are going on to try to understand how certain groundwater or soil concentrations will affect produce. In general, we always recommend, using a clean source of soil and water for irrigation. If you have concerns about the water that you're using to irrigate crops with, so if you're on a private well and you have concerns about the concentrations, you can opt to use an alternative source of water, or depending on what the concentrations are, if you want to call it what those are and what kind of plants you're growing, we can talk through what some of those risks might look like. But it's hard to make a uniform answer for all agricultural products. Right now, showing that different plants and different products absorb PFAS in different rates. So it's hard to get a blanket answer for all of them.
Okay, so there's really not good information on that yet, sounds like.
Right, there's not. At this point, it's still an evolving area of research. So we're trying to track that to see if there's guidance that we can provide. We're looking at trying to do some research here in New Hampshire soils to see what that looks like. But I know that there's also other academic groups that actually have studies going on this summer that are going to be looking at that question. So it's something that we're trying to follow right now.
Okay, great, thank you. And I just have one comment to add, kind of in response to anybody who's concerned about, I guess, paying a water bill because they've been switched off of their well. Also, I guess partial consolation would be a reduction in your electric bill because you're not running your well pump anymore. Just small consolation. And also, if the power goes out, you still got water. It's just a comment I'd add. Anyhow, thank you very much.
All right, thanks, Mr. Feldman. Liz Morgan from Bedford.
Liz, it looks like you're self-muted. If you can try to come off of mute.
Liz, are you there? Well, maybe we'll have to come back to Liz. Let's go on to Sharanthian Muthuvigiagam.
Hi. This is
Sorry if I mispronounced that.
No problem. Good evening. I am actually from Bedford, North Amherst Road. So I am actually the border of the blue line. So one of my neighbor is actually tested with the PFAS with the 22. So last August, I got the letter from NHDES for to test my well also. So I was actually thinking, is it actually that whatever I switched to the alternative source of water. So I don't use anymore the well, but I am actually using it for all other activities like doing the home cleaning the vessels and then taking bath and other kind of stuff. So if I do a testing, I went through the research at least $500 to $600. Is this testing, it can be funded from this one? It is only for the fund is actually available for installing the purification system, or it is actually available for testing. If I do the testing, I think other person also asked, you have to do it every year or every 6 months. Now I am actually putting more money on that well. So
Did the state do the testing, or are you having to do the testing on your own?
It is actually, state didn't do the testing, so they recommended to do the testing myself, but I didn't do that yet.
Okay. So you haven't had your well tested to date?
To date, yes.
Okay, and so you don't know what levels of PFAS may or may not be in your well?
That's correct.
I think it would be safe to follow up with us, and look at the contact information at the end of the presentation, and we can look into that again.
Okay, so it's actually the state will actually do the testing also, the next round of testing, so I don't need to test, and or I should follow up with you.
I think just follow up with us. It's hard for me to say whether or not the state would do the testing. We would have to evaluate your address and make recommendations based on what your address is.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you. Nicole, and I don't know how to pronounce that, Genoa's from Manchester.
It looks like Nicole is not connected to audio right now.
Okay, let's move on to Kathy Walsh. We'll come back to Nicole. Kathy Walsh from Londonderry.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. My question was actually already addressed. Nancy and the other gentleman did actually already ask my question, but I just want to follow up just for clarity for me. Same situation as both of them in that my well was initially tested at 5, and then a year later, and I was one of the first ones that Saint-Gobain did identify and test. And then a year later, I tested independently, and it was at 12. So it more than doubled in that year. Same situation as them being at 12. I'm not entitled to anything, but yet I pay for my own bottled water because I'm not comfortable being right at that level. So I guess in my own mind, just for clarity, I know it was said that you could test in another year, but I'm not comfortable with that. And I know, Jeff, you talked about the monitoring program. So how do I get more information on that when I'll be able to be eligible for testing again? I know we spoke and you said that you would put me on the list. In terms of timelines, I'm just looking for, a definite on when I could maybe be eligible.
So once Saint-Gobain submits an application for a groundwater management permit, that should be uploaded to our what we call our one-stop website, where we host documents pertaining to Saint-Gobain, as well as all of the other sites that we manage across the state. And you should be able to view that proposal and see what monitoring frequency they're proposing, and that's something we're gonna review and look at very closely.
Okay, so. For when they would be testing again, because what I don't want to get into a situation where I'm spending another $400 to test because no one's given me some time frame and I'm not comfortable waiting.
I think I missed the very first part of your question, but caught the last part about the timeline.
Oh, I just wanted to make sure that I was given a timeline, because if I'm not clear on when they're going to retest, I'm going to be forking out that money to test myself again independently. So I just wanted to be clear on when where that information is coming from on the timelines for retesting.
Yeah, so that'll be included. The proposal will have, coming from Saint-Gobain's environmental consultant, will have a proposal for a frequency of testing. And I would expect that would include a range of concentrations for wells. So where you're at 12, I would expect you to be in one of the more frequent sampling schedules. And once this groundwater management permit is issued, that's a publicly issued document. And, that would be available again on our one-stop website, available for residents to view. Also, while I'm talking, I don't know if I mentioned earlier in my talk that the initial agreement that we've signed and come to agreement on is posted on our website, and everybody can view that and read it if I hadn't already made that clear.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Kathy. Looks like Amy Doherty is going to ask the question for Nicole.
All right, this is from Nicole. I live in Manchester, New Hampshire, and I'm across the river from Saint-Gobain on Brent Street. I have public water. Why has my water or soil not been tested for PFOA? It was in Saint-Gobain's public water. I've asked this before at other meetings, but I have not received any assistance. I have 2 cases of cancer in my home. My husband had kidney cancer at 36 in 2016, and my son at 11, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma in 2020. The map shows that this section, this section of Manchester has not been offered testing. Are towns with significant portions of contaminated wells not easily accessible to waterline extension eligible for broader access to the fund in order to cover costs of extending city water mains? Nicole, I hope I asked your question appropriately. I'm sorry, there's more.
Did she say she's on public water?
I have public water. In the beginning, she says she's indicated, but there is more. Hold on. There are several in my neighborhood with high levels. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. I'm getting this. Sorry, it jumped. Nicole, sorry. Okay, that was the end of it. The map shows that this section of Manchester has not been shown offered testing.
So
Nicole,
I think, Brandon, would you address the testing of the Manchester public water system?
Sure, and you can reach out to me. I can actually send you the exact data for Manchester Waterworks, but Manchester Waterworks does test, well, actually before we even regulated PFAS, tested for PFAS, and now does so in accordance with our rules, and their levels are quite low in Manchester. For PFOA, it's generally less than 5 parts per trillion in the watercraft community.
All right. And Jeff, did you want to address soil testing in the in that area?
Yeah, right now, Saint-Gobain has already completed soil sampling in and around their facility, and we find that the levels that are above our direct contact screening value are confined to the immediate Saint-Gobain property in immediate abutting parcels, and that beyond that, the concentrations in soil generally drop below our direct contact screening values. There was some early sampling of sensitive areas such as daycare facilities, sampling playgrounds, sampling some farm fields, and those results were all below our current direct contact screening value for soil.
Can you explain what a direct contact screening value is?
So that is a concentration in soil that could potentially pose a risk for contact of coming into that soil. And maybe John, Dr. Patali could discuss direct contact a little more and potential exposure.
Yeah, sure. So when we derive those direct contact standards, we look at different situations. So for example, situations with construction workers, we also look at residential situations. So the kinds of like scenarios of like a kid being outside and coming in contact with soil, getting that on their skin, getting it in various parts of their body, possibly ingesting some of it if they're not washing their hands. So when we develop that sort of direct contact number, we're looking at those scenarios just to understand what might be happening just through like skin contact and ingestion.
Okay, great. Thank you. I hope that answers Nicole's questions. If not, Nicole, feel free to type a follow-up in the box. I think next is Richard Morgan, or is it Liz Morgan? I'm not sure.
Richard or Liz, it looks like you're unmuted. You have two different lines here. I'm not quite sure what's happening here because both lines are unmuted on our end. How about now?
Oh, there you go. Okay. Okay, someone did that. Okay. All right, so great. I have a couple questions that some might have already been answered. The one is that if I am actually getting the delivery of water, that I will be on that round for the, in the next couple of weeks, getting a letter. Because on that one slide with the map was just a little bit too small to see my address. I'm on Terrell Road, and I think that this will probably be the shortest time I have had talking with Jeff, seeing as I've talked to him a million times and for lots and lots of moments on the phone. And so if this is actually happening, I will be very, very excited. I will echo also the fact that getting, water delivery has been difficult with Monadnock. Those people seem so stressed and overworked. And so I would say that am I correct in understanding that in a couple of weeks, I will get a letter if I have water already being delivered to me?
So in the case of people that are part of the 350 or so properties that were on the listed in the initial agreement, they should be receiving a letter in the coming weeks. And just skimming through the agreement here, I do see a few properties on Terrell Road mentioned. If you're part of the larger number of the 600 plus properties, that'll probably be a little longer until we go through that legal review process and get that approved. So that timing on those letters might be a little further out than the initial properif
mine is on there if I contact you after, Jeff, or if my number's on that list?
Yeah, sure. You can give me a call tomorrow, and I can walk you through the list. It's also available online.
So it is?
Yeah, that is available online.
Okay.
And we can provide that. We can figure out a way to get that on screen or post it with the recording of the meeting tonight. So when that gets posted, we can make sure the link is prominently displayed so you can find that easily.
Okay, that's perfect. And another couple of things then, because I see that you have a doctor on your panel there. I'm curious to know what about what's the effect, or do you know that the PFOA has? Is the primarily internal, or what effect does it have topically? Like obviously showering, things like this. If PFOA is, as I understand it, in an example similar, like the way that they make those Teflon pans, and the surface is pretty much non-penetrable after a while. How does it affect topically? Eyes, skin, things like that. Do you have any information on that?
Yeah, so we call it your route of exposure. So the way that a chemical gets into your body. With PFAS, the main way that these seem to get into people's bodies or into animal bodies is through ingestion. So that's if you have contaminated water, contaminated food, you're consuming that, it gets absorbed in a certain part of your intestines. As far as topically goes, because of some of the chemical properties of these, they don't behave like other chemicals that cross the skin very easily. There are some studies that have looked at how they can be transferred across the skin, but those are oftentimes in concentrations that are hundreds to thousands of times higher than what we've seen in the water in the greater Merrimack, Litchfield, Bedford area. They're just at much higher concentrations is what would present risk to skin contact or that absorption across your skin layer. So in general, we don't really look at that as a huge source of exposure. Really, if anything, most of the time when people are having skin contact with PFAS and that's a source of exposure, it's either through firefighters that are coming in contact with firefighting foam or because they're using firefighting gear that's treated with PFAS, or in some cases, if individuals are using certain cosmetic products, because PFAS are still present in several cosmetic products. So when it's at those much higher concentrations and you're using it on sensitive skin areas like on the face, that's where you may have absorption. But again, those are concentrations that are orders of magnitude higher than what we see in water.
Okay.
Our drinking water standards are based on that ingestion route because that's the most sensitive route that we identified when we reviewed the science, is that intake in the form of drinking water or in the form of contaminated food.
Okay, and so that same thing applies for like the eyes, like as far as vision?
So as far as like ocular absorption, no one's really studied that.
Okay.
Again, you would, for the amount of water that you would need to come in contact with, though, for just the surface area of the eyes, you'd almost be talking about like eye wash station levels of use of water. You want to be talking about minute amounts that you're getting it from like washing your face or showering. That would still be incidental relative to what you get from ingestion.
Okay, and then so the water that I think I understand correctly, that's Pennachuck, that's in that area where I am up on Back River Road, Terrell, that's the water source coming from Manchester?
Yes, so in Bedford, where Pennachuck stores water, it's generally purchased from Manchester.
Manchester, okay. And then the same thing applies what I think Mike said earlier about they have routinely tested all the time. They're heavily regulated and such.
Yes, all the community water systems have requirements to test at least quarterly. Pennachuck often samples more than what's required. All the data is both on Pennachuck's website for all the different systems they have, and also on our website, or you can contact me and I can email you the results.
Okay, and then I want to know, or if you guys have this answer, is Saint-Gobain still emitting these toxins or what?
Kathy, finally, a question for the air person.
Well, thank you for the question, Cheryl.
Liz, but it's okay.
Yes, so Saint-Gobain was required under our state statute to install control equipment, which took place last July. They did a stack test to verify whether the device was working properly, and they did that in September. To give you kind of a perspective, back in 2006, they were emitting a large amount of the PFOA that caused the groundwater contamination, and they reformulated and reduced that emissions by about 96% back then. The stack test that they did on the control device back in September showed that they were measuring 50 different PFAS compounds potentially in the emissions, but they only had 17 pounds a year of a total of all of those PFAS compounds going into the control device, and 2 pounds per year of all 50 of them coming out. So they have significantly reduced their air emissions, yes.
Okay, well, then I guess my last question is that, is there any way to hold Saint-Gobain more accountable than what all of us have been seeing? I mean, honestly, it's like they have caused so much havoc, and it just seems like we all have to say, okay, well, we'll get there sometime. It's like the endless trial. It's like Saint-Gobain has done so much damage and has cost so many people so much money, hardship, and who knows the illnesses. I mean, is there any way that we can hold Saint-Gobain more accountable?
So,
Mike, do you want to take that?
Sure. So thanks for your question. And you know, we are absolutely sympathetic to everything you're saying here. I want to tell you that the people who are on this call, they've lived this with all of you residents ever since 2016. It dominates most of their days. They spend a lot of time talking with all of you, working on this project, working to advance and require Saint-Gobain to do the things that it's required to do under the law. You know, I'm not in a position to say what I can say. What I said at the beginning of this is that, this is an important milestone in the project, but we're not done yet. We have a lot of work to do. We have a lot of work to do yet with Saint-Gobain and working to ensure that they fulfill their responsibilities. And that's going to go on for many years in reality. And also outside the consent decree area, we're working to address and try to help folks who are located outside the consent decree area. So, I'm not sure how I would answer the question, only to say that we are looking to, and we expect and will continue to work to ensure that Saint-Gobain does everything it's required to do under the law. And I would emphasize that, the state has very specific requirements, statutes and rules that govern what a responsible party needs to do when it contaminates people's wells or soil. But that's only part of it, right? So as much as we're working and will continue to work very hard to address this, all we can do is what we are empowered to do under state law and state rules.
Right. Yeah, it seems like they got a sweet deal. Did they ever get fined by the state?
Well, I think that there was a fine associated with the consent decree that they entered into with our air division regarding their air emissions. So there was a fine associated with that.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Well, I mean, I know you guys. Thank you so much. And it's part of it. I mean, it's not your fault. It's Saint-Gobain. That's the elephant in the room. And so, yeah. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Liz. All right. Next up is Cheryl Perry from Londonderry. Cheryl, are you there? Hello?
Cheryl, you are unmuted.
Cheryl, can you unmute yourself? All right, let's move on to Bob Musil from Bedford. We'll try to come back to Cheryl afterwards. Are you still with us, Bob?
Bob, I'm showing that you are unmuted.
You just got to click on the little microphone symbol and unmute yourself.
It may be that he's stepped away.
All right. Amy Doherty for
back?
Ron Dunn. Yeah, we'll come back to Bob.
Thanks.
Oh, Amy Doherty for Cheryl. Sorry, Amy Doherty for Cheryl Perry.
Jim, I'm not sure that Cheryl is still on, but she did type a question in, and it says, is our property automatically on the list if we are receiving free bottled water from Saint-Gobain? She lives on Rolling Ridge Road in Londonderry.
I think we can say most likely yes from several of the answers that were given earlier. All right, let's move on to Ron Dunn from Londonderry.
All right. First off, thank you guys for doing this tonight. I'd like to update you guys on Monadnock. I've been on bottled water since 2019. I was one of the first 66 homes, and we used to get our bottled water in 3 days. It's progressively gotten worse. Now it's about 3 to 4 weeks, just so you guys know. What I tell people that ask me now is I tell them that as soon as they get their bottled water delivery, order your next one. Because if you guys aren't aware of it, it is taking about 3 to 4 weeks to get the bottled water. I know Nathan's a great guy. You call him, you talk to him, he tells you that he's out straight. I know we've talked in the past about trying to get an alternate source. If that is possible, that would be great for people here, at least in Londonderry, if that is still an option, because it is taking them a long time to get the deliveries. Just so you guys know, that is taking that long.
Thank you for bringing that to our attention.
Yep. I just want to ask a quick question. During the legal review, could you guys ask that they look at the maintenance issues of these point of entry systems and how often the wells are going to be tested? And if the levels never drop below 12, does the maintenance continue forever? That doesn't seem possible to me. So that's why I'm wondering if you guys could ask that question. And, you know, it seems like if the levels here in Londonderry don't ever drop below 12, it would be cheaper to put everybody on public water. Just wondering what you guys' thoughts are on that.
Jeff, do you want to take that?
Yeah, so as part of this plan for the point of entry treatment system, Saint-Gobain is going to be submitting an operation and maintenance plan to DES for review, and that'll specify the frequency of sampling the raw water, so the water coming out of your well, to see what that concentration is, as well as water that passes through the treatment system to make sure the carbon is effectively removing the PFAS. And, you know, according to our rules, that has to continue until such time as the water concentration of PFAS in the water drops below our standard. So, you know, if that's, 3 years, if it's longer, it's going to be a longer time period, but it's until that water meets standard.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Dunn. John Costas from Bedford.
There we go. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thanks for taking my question, and thanks for all the service that you guys are doing on our behalf. Hey, I'm in the target zone, and I'm in the northwest corner of Bedford in that gray area that hasn't been tested yet. What's the timing as far as when our wells are going to be tested in this area?
Mike, do you want to take that?
Actually, I think Jeff might be better equipped for that one.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks for your question. So if you're located within one of the buffered areas that I talked about for the Bedford fire station or one of the other potential contamination sources that Saint-Gobain has identified, we issued them a letter requesting that those properties be added to what we call the next addenda to the work plan. So far there's been 14 addenda to the sampling work plan. So basically within 30 days, they have to identify all remaining properties inside the consent decree. And once they've identified those, DES approves it, they will be going out and reaching out to residents to sample.
So timing wise?
I think, assuming that they submit that to us by the due date of June 3rd, it usually takes about a month for them to go through an attorney review process before they issue letters to invite residents to sample. So, I would expect actual sampling to start taking place sometime roughly 2 months from now.
Okay. So once the sampling is done and the testing is done, how are the homeowners notified? Are we immediately notified on how's that whole process work?
Yeah, so if Saint-Gobain samples your well and it's over standard, they have just a few days to turn around those results and immediately notify you and offer bottled water, and they provide contact information for Monadnock. So they include, as part of their letter back to residents, they include a cover letter, table that summarizes the results, and the complete laboratory report, so you can see all the details that they received from the lab.
Yeah. So are they testing other things other than the PFAS?
They are only testing for PFAS, but included as part of their analysis, I forget the exact number, but it's probably 16 or more different PFAS that they test for. So, there's several compounds.
Okay. Last question. Is there some sort of registry so we can look in town and see what our neighbors in the other streets are registered or how they've tested?
So all of the data that's being generated by sampling that's either done by the state outside the consent decree or Saint-Gobain inside the consent decree is posted to what we call our environmental monitoring database. And to make a long story short, that database feeds an online map that is publicly viewable by residents. So you can go on that and see all of the PFAS data that have been uploaded to that database. I will caution you that there is a bit of a time lag from the time a sample is collected, received, and ultimately posted to the map. So that's a several month process from the time the lab results come back. So not all results may be on there, but you can certainly go on and see the data points that I've been showing tonight on an interactive viewer.
And you'd be able to look that up by address.
Yeah, there's a search function where you can type in your address and it'll zoom to your neighborhood and you can see what data is from the surrounding area.
Okay, thanks again for your time.
Thank you. Michael Dalzell, or Dalzell from Merrimack.
Hello.
Hello.
You there?
Yes.
Yeah. How you doing? I'm in Merrimack and I can drive. I've been contacted that I've several houses around my area have been contaminated, tested positive for the pollution that Jermaine put in. I was wondering what is my options on the filtrations. It's only a matter of time before I get into my well. I don't care what, what my levels are right now. I'm in the process of getting it retested again now. It's not in yet. But what is my options for getting something to prevent this when it happens down the future, which chances are it will happen. It's polluted through airborne tactics, and it's going to happen. I'd like to know what my options are on a filtration system for my house.
Have you had your well tested?
I had it well tested in 2016 before the levels went down. As I said, there's several houses in my neighborhood, which is one within 500 feet have been tested positive for it. As I said, it's a matter of time before it comes, whether it's granite or whatever, it's going to seep down into my well. Very simple. If it's all around my house, it's going to be happening. I'm looking for I don't want to get cancer. Like I said, I'm getting a little old for that. I couldn't handle it. I'm wondering what is my options on. I have a filtration system in there now. It's a salt system, but what are my options for getting rid of the contamination that Gobain put in there?
So I think one of the first things that I would recommend is that you go to our PFAS webpage, and there is a form there that you can request to have your well tested again. And I think that we can evaluate your address for testing to see whether you're inside or outside the consent decree area.
Yes, I've done that.
How recent? How
retesting it? It's on its way to be retested. It is, but there is 4 or 5 houses, right, my neighbors that have it. One within 500 feet, which I knew they were contaminated because they sent me a notice.
Okay, and so your well is going to be resampled, and so
Yes,
I think the process that you would need to follow is to get your well resampled, find out what your results are, and then you can evaluate what the proper treatment options may be.
Well, if it tests positive, what shall I do? Shall I go out and buy my own charcoal filter, or would I? That's what I'm asking. What is my options with Saint-Gobain that did this problem to begin with? Are they responsible for anything if it tests positive?
Yeah, Brandon, this might be a good opportunity for you to talk about point of use treatment systems. That they're a relatively easy to install, low cost, easy to maintain system that can really provide you with reliable, safe, clean water when it comes to treating for PFAS. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, Brandon?
Sure. I mean, we have some good resources, and I could send you information that's on the internet for this. But if you're on a private well in this area, obviously you're concerned about PFAS, but you should be equally concerned about naturally occurring contaminants that are known to cause cancer or other adverse effects. Things like arsenic, which definitely is an issue in New Hampshire. Uranium, manganese, and then even things like bacteria and nitrate that can come from man-made sources. What we would recommend, given you're concerned about your well water quality, and rightfully so, is that you test for both the standard things that everyone in New Hampshire is worried about, and then also if you're worried about PFAS, you can address that at the same time, even if you don't have it right now. We have a fact sheet that points to point of view. So a kitchen treatment system, we can treat like a tap on your kitchen sink and then maybe your refrigerator. Using reverse osmosis. And
I have a full salt system in there now. Does that do anything?
It's not going to do anything for PFAS. So you need, let me follow through. You need to sample. You can sample after your salt system, and maybe that'll remove some hardness, but it won't address arsenic or the other contaminants. You really need to address all the contaminants concerned, natural PFAS. But if you're really worried that things are going to change and you really feel uncertain, no matter what you're advised, put in a point of use reverse osmosis system on your kitchen sink. If you do it yourself, it'll be $200. If you pay somebody, it could be $1,000. I heard earlier someone got a quote for $2,400. Get multiple quotes, but point of use reverse osmosis reduces almost every contaminant, natural or man-made, to levels that are safe.
I understand that. I'm a contractor. Sorry to interrupt you, but under the sink is not going to do nothing for the whole house. I'm looking for a system.
Drinking water to reduce exposure. If you want to focus on the whole house, then you can. And we have a tool. You can take your testing results, type in "Be Well Informed," just put it in the internet search engine. You put in your sampling results for PFAS and all the other contaminants. It'll show you exactly what you can do if you want to treat every drop of water in your house. Or if you are worried about drinking water, you can save a lot of money and focus on where you get your drinking water from. But Be Well Informed will give you both options.
I understand that. What I'm saying, though, is now that it's coming in, and if I do test positive on my street, and I'm sure I will, because there's a half dozen houses. I live on a cul-de-sac, and like I said, I built the house myself. But the point I'm getting at is that I had all the water tested and everything when I originally built it, and they recommended this as True Skillings. They recommended this system that I have in there now. Now, what I'm saying to you is, will a charcoal system that I'm going to be responsible for now, or can I get a rebate of $1,500? I tell you right now, I'm a contractor, is not going to cover it. What are my options in getting reimbursed for a system that I need to put in now because of the catastrophe that they caused?
So I think, Mr. Dazzle, I think let's follow up. You can follow up with me, offline after the meeting. We can figure out where your address is in relationship to the consent decree area. So then we would know whether or not your well would be covered by the Saint-Gobain, or whether or not you would be eligible for the rebate program that Director Wimsatt talked about earlier. And so let's just follow up on that tomorrow or the next day.
Okay, that sounds good. I'll call you Mr. James Martin. I'll call you, and yes, I'll do that. Like I said, this is a catastrophe that I don't even know why the town of Merrimack is even allowing Gebain to operate in the same town. They've come up to EPA standards, yes, but they considered that they should allow no more permits for them on anything, because such a catastrophe they caused in this town and surrounding areas. I'm just a little upset at the whole process, because they just let them continue operating.
Yes, well, I appreciate your comments, and we can certainly understand your thoughts there.
Okay, thank you all. I mean, you guys are the choir. I understand that, but like I said, there's more's got to be done with this culprit that is causing these problems, and he's going to continue causing them. I mean, it goes on and on. And it's not just here; it's in other states. And
understood.
All right.
Understood.
Thank you. Thank you,
sir.
Yeah.
All right, Diane Hunter from Bedford.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, I have a question for Dr. Patali. Can you get preeclampsia from this PFOA stuff? Is that a cause?
So PFAS has been associated with pregnancy-induced hypertension and certain forms of preeclampsia. However, it's something that's been studied and there's an association. That doesn't mean that it shows causation. It is something that in the research community, they're trying to understand what that relationship is. There was a large study out of West Virginia that did find an association between PFOA and that health outcome, but that's not the only thing that can cause that health outcome. So if your question is aimed at, someone that has had that, it's something that they should talk with their physician. Yeah, it's important to talk with your physician about other risk factors, but it is something to bring up that if you've had exposure and you're concerned about that, or if you have a family member that's had exposure and they've experienced that, if they're wanting more information, there are federal resources that can help physicians sort of navigate and understand what information is available. Again, that's something that can get a little bit into the weeds, and I'm happy to have a follow-up call with you, or if you want me to connect you or your physician with additional resources, either through the state or through some of our federal partners, I can help out with that.
Okay, the reason I ask is I used to live in Litchfield. I now live in Bedford. So I'm getting a double whammy here. Across the street, there was, when they were tested, as 86 parts per trillion, and next door, where I lived in Litchfield, was 260 parts per trillion. Pretty high numbers, right? Mm-hmm. And when I had my son in the early 80s, I got preeclampsia with no other health problems whatsoever. And I did read an article that stated that drinking the water, I had well water there, could cause preeclampsia. Because the doctor said there's no other explanation why I got it back then. I mean, it's a long time ago, but they could never find any other reason why I got it, because I never had high blood pressure. I never had any other health issues.
Okay. Yeah, if you'd like to talk more about that and kind of understand like what that exposure history is, I'm happy to connect offline about that.
Okay.
We have a terrific epidemiologist at Dartmouth College that specializes in PFAS and maternal child health outcomes. So if you'd like to get more information, I'd be happy to also make that introduction to her. Her name is Dr. Megan Romano. I work with her very closely on some other projects we're trying to do on PFAS in the state. So if you'd like that information, please get my contact information on the final slide and I'll make that introduction.
Yeah, he was born premature, low birth weight, asthma, the whole thing. So, all right. I won't take too much more time. My second question is, I got a letter from Jeff from you back in April of 2021 saying I was in the area described in the consent decree. And I tried to call Saint-Gobain to get tested. They never ever returned my phone calls to get my water tested again. When I go out my street and take a left, which is a stone's throw from my house, a couple of years ago on Smith Road, they put in water lines for everybody. And then I think you said tonight, east of Liberty Hill, they might be doing some water connection lines. So I'm kind of in the middle between these two places that are getting water lines. And so I haven't been tested since 2019, and I want to know how do I get retested?
Dan, I think probably the best thing to do is follow up with me tomorrow so I can look into the specifics of your address and try and search through the history there and figure out why they're not returning your call. So I can look into it with you offline tomorrow.
Well, that would be great. I'm just a little nervous about this whole thing, and like the gentleman before you, this is crazy. I know they have a lot of money, and that's why they're still going. Let's be honest, but it's not right what they're doing to everybody. You know, and I want to thank you all, your whole panel, for doing what you do. Okay, because I know it's hard on your end too.
Thank you, Diane, for your comments. We appreciate that.
Thank you. I guess I'll be in touch with you, Dr. Patali, and then Jeff too.
Look forward to speaking with you tomorrow. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, bye-bye.
Next up, we have Lorene Allen from Merrimack.
Hi, good evening. Thank you. I know you weren't done yet, and I know this process of working for solutions for the impacted water supply wells currently is lengthy and cumbersome. In the meantime, as you've heard from some residents here, people are very concerned about their exposure. Taking the lead, from the MVD, and I love that Brandon gave a shout out, and he knows that our water commissioners, our residents, a lot of Merrimack dads stepped up and put their heads together and have done immense work, and they heard what the community asked for, and what we asked for here is the same as I hear from Bedford, Litchfield, Manchester, Londonderry, everyone. People, when they realize that they've been exposed, they Google a bit, they do their own research, they talk to each other, and they say, oh my God, this isn't great, we need to stop our exposure. So they come to that conclusion, and I have seen people from all ages and all backgrounds who came to that conclusion that they want their exposure to stop. That is why the MVD, 93% of our ratepayers voted at our expense, to remediate 4 more wells in addition to only 2 that Saint-Gobain took responsibility for. So the same issue that I'm hearing here that people are talking about, outside the line, inside the line, they tested 11 or 12. They're still exposed. There's no responsible party because you can only enforce what we regulate. I do understand that. But keep in mind that, Merrimack ratepayers voted overwhelmingly to take PFAS out of our water. We do not want this exposure. Bedford residents 4 years ago were going to be hooked up to MVD water right off the Back River Road area of Bedford, and they said, we don't want it. So here I live in Merrimack since 1985, moved here for the environment and the perceived safety and all the things we love about New Hampshire. And there are residents in Bedford saying they'd rather be hooked up to Manchester water than Merrimack water. Nothing against Manchester, but when I came here, I picked Merrimack. I picked Merrimack for a reason. So our total exposure, as you know, we have ingested water, we have inhaled air or local food sources, things we don't talk about, honey, maple syrup, eggs, fish, so many other sources, garden soil, background exposure, products that we didn't even know were bad for us, that the whole country is waking up for that. So my concern is when we talk about the technologies for remediation, our public water here is very unified, over what our goals are and how we do not want exposure. But the POET systems that Saint-Gobain is putting in and all of that technology is geared to long chain reduction. And as you know, in the public who's received water results, they can look at that panel. Short chain PFAS have been around for years and years and years. We have exposure to the long chain that we're regulating, and we're doing a good job there compared to pretty much all of the nation. But the total exposure includes short chain. I would like to, this deal has been made. There's further work to be done. But what bothered me when I saw those POET systems is, I don't know this, but my assumption was, looking at that area, that it was very, very costly to hook up those homes to public water. And Saint-Gobain potentially just said, no, this is what we're willing to do, and we're not budging on it. In my opinion, they shouldn't get that choice, but we know that's not how the world works. But when you look at a POET system in a home, when I learned about this in 2016, we put in a whole house system and we tested it just before a year, and we found breakthrough of PFAS in that GAC system. And we continued to test. After a year, we put in a point of entry, what Mike has referred to and Brandon has referred to as those reverse osmosis, $200. APEC is a very good one, but there's other ones out there. That is crucial. So is there a way that, I mean, this deal sounds like it's done, right? I don't think you can go back and say, hey, in addition to a whole house system, we want you to put on the kitchen tap. I tell that to people in my town all the time. It's important because what slips through that whole house that looks so immense that people believe they're safe, you know, is not going to get through that dedicated tap in the kitchen. That's so important. If you can't do that in terms of your negotiations with Saint-Gobain, which you probably can't, can we put out some messaging as a state, you know, and can we really make sure that people have this information? Even the people here who are talking about sitting at 11, 12, you know, I don't know what they're doing, if they're drinking bottled water or what, but that is a really good solution. We could use maybe some of the funds that the state has to really promote and get those in people's homes, because the 3,600 or so ID'd for sampling within the consent decree, you know, there's what, about 1,400 or so of them that haven't been sampled for a variety of reasons. You know, I don't know, that's a considerable gap. So when Saint-Gobain says that they're substantially completed, I just look at the numbers and I say, no, they aren't. You know, every week I hear about people that I'm always sending them, you know, to you guys to say, hey, get your name on the test list, and then they get added on, which is fabulous. But you know, my point is, in the meantime, we have to protect human health. We have to stop the exposure that people have had for a long time. We do not know definitively the harm from all PFAS, but every PFAS that you look up, you see nothing. There's not a PFAS anywhere that you research and you find, this looks like a safe one. There's no such thing as a safe one. We are exposed to a mixture of PFAS, and waiting for definitive science is not going to help anyone. So I'm asking.
Yeah. So Lorene, I think that we can have a further conversation with you about your concerns about the POET systems. I think Brandon did discuss, you know, the confidence that we do have in them and the testing that, you know, will be done to ensure that there isn't breakthrough with those systems. But I think that you have some valid concerns that we should have further conversations about.
Okay. I agree. Thank you.
Great. All right. Thank you very much. Haley Jones from Burlington, Vermont, so a little outside of the consent decree area.
Just slightly, yeah. Thank you guys so much for holding this today and for giving everybody time to ask questions. It's such a valuable space. I'm a community organizer with some folks in Londonderry, which is why I look like I'm way outside of the consent decree, but I hear about this every day. So I've been hearing over the past couple of weeks, you know, that Saint-Gobain and DES entered into this consent decree in 2018, right? Based on the data that you had at the time. And it really seems to me like you guys at the DES are taking such a solid and science-based approach to PFAS remediation. So I'm wondering if you think that that 2018 consent decree agreement is still sufficient for all the impacted homes. I'm wondering, so first of all, if you think it's sufficient, I'm wondering if in your ideal world you would adapt that consent decree to take into account the 4 past years of data and any well sampling that is to come. And finally, since you guys are a regulatory agency and also one of the members signed onto this consent decree, I'm wondering if anybody knows why you took a neutral petition on the recent letter from the PFAS Commission demanding an extension to the decree. And I can repeat those 3 questions as needed.
I'm sure Director Wimsett has all of it down.
I do. I think I do, actually. So first of all, on your question about the consent decree and whether or not it is adequate, or I'm not sure what word you used, but no, the answer is no. Clearly, I think I stated earlier in the meeting that there are many, many wells outside the consent decree boundary that are contaminated with PFOA above standards that we believe that in many cases, those wells are contaminated as a result of air emissions from Saint-Gobain. So in that respect, the agreement is not adequate to address all the impacted wells, clearly. that is why we are working very hard, in addition to working to ensure that Saint-Gobain fulfills its responsibilities inside the consent decree area, as they're required to do under the terms of the agreement. We're working hard to develop other solutions for the folks who find themselves living outside the consent decree area. And, as far as, I would reject the idea that we're not considering the 4 years. We consider all the data we've collected right up to the current date whenever we make decisions or attempt to do things to try to solve this problem. The fact that the consent decree was executed in 2018 and it is durable means that we can't unilaterally amend the consent decree. If we could unilaterally amend it, we would do so, but we're not in a position to do that. As far as taking a neutral position on the commission's letter, that is pretty common. We do sit on the commission. The letter was written to the agency and to Saint-Gobain. And so for me as a member of the commission to take a position on the letter that was being sent to my agency would have been a little bit absurd. So I think it was entirely appropriate not to take a position on that.
Okay, thank you. So I'm hearing you say, obviously, as the experts here, that the consent decree is not adequate, clearly, that if you could unilaterally extend the consent decree, that you would, and that when you had a chance to take a position, you took a neutral one. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for your questions.
Thank you. German Ortiz from Bedford. German.
Did you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, how are you? But first, thank you for the hard work that you're doing. I would like to have more specific answers about the time frame when Saint-Gobain is going to step up to the plate and mitigate the damage that they did. I live in Bedford, and we're in Houston Drive. We are 2,000 feet away from Sonoma Drive. We have water lines from Penachuk. So what will be the solution for us in this neighborhood and the time frame? Will we be connected to a water line, or we will have a point of entry device?
Jeff, can you handle that?
Yeah, so I believe the Reverend Houston Drive in Bedford is covered by the second proposal that I talked about, covering those other 600 wells that are over standard. And we're just not prepared to talk about that tonight, given that it's still in legal review. But as Mike mentioned, we hope to make that public, as soon as we can.
Thank you. Yeah, but I mean, this started happening way back 2 years ago. This is the dramatic situation for the people here, and thousands of people have been suffering from this. And seems to me like Saint-Gobain is dragging their feet. Reviewing this and reviewing that. It's been years. This is not a way of living. Our houses are the main investment we have in our life. They have to stay up to the plate and fix this as soon as possible. Now, another question that you can answer that, I appreciate it. And another question that I have is to Dr. Patel. If the water is not good for drinking or cooking, how is it going to be good for taking a shower? The body's going to absorb those chemicals in there. I don't understand that either.
So do you want me to start with, so I can start with the exposure piece. So based on a chemical's properties, it determines whether or not it can be efficiently absorbed across the skin or not. Certain organic compounds that are not very, we call it polar, they don't have a lot of charge to them, are able to transfer across the skin very well. So when we think of things like pharmaceutical steroids, certain petroleum products, other organic solvents, when those come in contact with the skin, they can cross the skin easily. They can just diffuse across. PFAS don't have that property.
Okay.
They act like surfactants. So in the similar way that if you create soap suds, they're not well absorbed across the skin, but if you ingest them, that can be absorbed. The internal portion of your intestines, where food is absorbed, has chemical properties that can absorb things like PFAS, but your skin does not have those same properties. So that's where, when we look at setting the drinking water standards, we try to assess what are the main ways that these chemicals get into the body. And in the case of PFAS, it seems to be ingestion, not dermal contact. So there's very different rates of absorption. So you would need much higher amounts in water for it to present a skin contact risk comparable to what we see at these low levels for ingestion.
Well, thank you for your answer. I appreciate it. And again, Jeff, it's no way to know any time frame from Saint-Gobain to fix the problem in this area and the surrounding towns. This is a multi-billion-dollar company. They have the resources to do it. I don't understand why it's taking so long for them to step up to the plate and fix the problem.
Yeah, so again, we received that proposal just late Friday afternoon, and you know, it's got to work its way through the legal review process, and we can make it public. So we do have something from Saint-Gobain detailing those 600 plus properties and what the remedy is.
All right. Okay, thank you again for your good work. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Glenn Hauser. Is Glenn available? Can Glenn unmute himself? All right. At this point in the evening, I'm going to move on to Stephen Brochu from Bedford.
It looks like there might be a technical difficulty with Mr. Brochu right now. He needs to enter in. So perhaps we can go on and then come right back, and we'll try to see if we can.
Sounds good. Robert, let's do Robert Musil then.
All right. So Robert Musil, we're having a few technical difficulties here as well, but
all right.
Let's just try, if you don't mind just waiting 1 minute. There are he has a few addresses here.
Okay.
How about now? Excellent.
There we go.
Am I talking to somebody?
Yes.
Okay. I live in on Ledgewood Road in Bedford, and my question is that when do I know if I'm going to be given some water? And my question is because I have water at both ends of the street, and I'm trying to figure out if they're going to put a water main down and give me water, or do I get a point of entry system? That's my question.
Jeff?
Yeah, and I'm not familiar with that road off the top of my head. Is that inside the consent decree, or are you currently receiving water from Monadnock?
Yeah, I'm receiving water from Monadnock for 2 years.
Okay. I'm just skimming through the agreement that lists the 350 so properties. I don't see yours listed. So you're most likely part of the 600 that is currently in legal review.
Really?
So we hope to have that public soon.
Okay. Now, is that for public water, or is that for a point of entry type system?
There's going to be a combination of remedies included there, and we'll have to get into the specifics and which property has a proposal for which. But combination of water lines, potential water lines, and poets.
So in other words, I won't see anything until 4 or 5 years from now.
I think you'd probably see something sooner, but I can't speak to a timeline until we get into the specifics of the proposal.
Now, nothing against the point of entry systems, okay? And I don't think the gentleman is still there about the water filters. There's not a water filter that's made in the market that eliminates PFAS totally. And I was going to ask him that question. And because he's not there, he's not going to be able to answer the question.
Brandon, are you still available?
I am. And
hello, Brandon.
Yeah, so PFAS continues to be emerging science, but
yes,
certainly the point of use reverse osmosis filter systems includes carbon and membrane.
Yeah, but I want
has been effective at removing both the long and short chain compounds.
I would want a whole house system.
That, it is an emerging science where the basic carbon systems are effective for the PFAS that we currently can test for a while, but then of course the short chain can break through. What's beginning to happen, and it's happening with water systems now, is in addition to the carbon, they're then putting a resin after the carbon to polish for the short chain. But that's not commonplace for the residential systems quite yet.
So what you're saying is that the residential whole house system does not eliminate PFAS.
That's not what I said. It does eliminate PFAS, but that at some point before the regulated compounds break through, the non-regulated ones will. And either you accept that the non-regulated ones break through, or the resin gets changed out sooner so you continue to have non-detect. You can see the data from our current systems and online from our reports, where in fact, and even NVD, where in fact at first you have non-detect for the long and short chain compounds, but at some point the unregulated short chain compounds that right now seem to have a lower toxicity profile break through sooner than the ones that we regulate.
Now on a whole house system, which I would prefer, a whole point of use is useless unless you don't want to drink the water out of every faucet, okay? Because point of use is only one faucet at a time, or you have to feed the whole house. Who's going to maintain all these systems? Is Saint-Gobain going to maintain them? Then the serviceman to fix it? Or is somebody else going to have to fix it? And who's going to get charged for it?
So Saint-Gobain is going to be submitting a operations and maintenance plan for the point of entry treatment systems. And, under our state rules, they're required to pay for ongoing operation and maintenance and associated testing for that entire system, as long as water coming out of your well is above our state standards. So, that's going to be incumbent on Saint-Gobain to maintain those systems. And any system that's not maintained is going to eventually fail, whether you're treating for hardness or whatnot. So these have to be maintained and tested on a regular basis. And they're going to submit a plan that we are going to review that lays the criteria for how they're going to be tested and ultimately maintained.
Well, that's the thing that bothers me about the point of the whole house system, is who's going to maintain it and who's going to keep on testing and say I don't have PFAS. It's I don't understand why the town doesn't say you pay for the water lines, put the water lines in. And as I said, I live on this one street, Ledgewood, and that one street is Brick Mill has water, and the other one is Jenkins Road has water going to supermarkets. So I only have about a mile long a street. And 3 or 4 houses on my street, Ledgewood, have PFAS. And they're getting bottled water. It's nice to say they're going to fix the problem. The problem is they're not fixing it. I would say everybody I look at here, shut your ice machine off and fill tray with ice. Live with ice out of your freezer for a while. And then you'd say, I understand why the problem is. You buy a refrigerator and you can't use it unless you put a point of use in there to uncontaminate the water. But who's going to pay for it? Why should a normal homeowner pay for this or pay for anything? It's all Saint-Gobain's business. And I understand you have problems trying to get them and the state should be a little bit more active in getting things done, especially with homeowners, whatever. Try to sell your house and tell the customer you can't drink the water unless he puts it in the system. Now, these are full entries, just to make a last point, is that the full house systems, okay, this is full filtering all the water. I used to put them in. I don't know anything that's under $2,000 to put them in and maintain them. You can put them under your sink, that's cheap. But when you want a full house system, then it costs you double amount. So the $1,500 or whatever you get for rebate is not going to cover the cost of putting them in by any means. I just very, very disappointed of listening to everything and then find out that my house and street is on the 600 or whatever there, and we've been without water for 2 years. You know, I guess there's no priority whatever on where everything goes. Pardon me.
We understand your frustration for sure, sir. You know, as Mike mentioned, you know, we are looking at expanding the rebate program, but you know, we're not at a position where we can. But I'm just mentioning one of the points that you made earlier. You know, we are looking at expanding that rebate program. We just aren't at a point where we can talk about it tonight. So
why
yeah,
doesn't
we hear you. We hear you on that point.
Why doesn't the town go after them to put water lines in? That's my concern. That doesn't make any sense.
Oh, I think that if you're looking for the town to do something, then that would be something you would need to bring up with your town representatives.
Well, yeah, but you're part of the town. You represent the town in this problem. I mean, it doesn't seem like
actually, the towns can have their own, you know, unique representation within this situation. So,
well, you answered a lot of questions, but you didn't really answer the question at how things are going to get done. So I guess I'll never. When do you think I'll receive a letter saying that I'm going to be given something to fix my water problem? Jeff?
Yeah, I think once we get through the review process and, you know, if this is ultimately approved, then Saint-Gobain should be responding, you know, several weeks from the date this is approved. They should be getting something out to you.
So you're sending, okay. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Yep.
Amy Doherty for Glenn Hauser.
All right, I got a question from Glenn. How can a company still be in business if they have still contaminated everyone, or if they are still contaminating everyone?
So, Mike, do you want to address that?
Yeah, that's at some level almost a rhetorical question. It's not a question that I can give you an answer to. What I can tell you is that as a state agency that regulates manufacturing facilities with respect to their impacts on the environment, we are using all the resources of the agency to address this contamination with respect to cleaning up the actual site, investigating the actual site, investigating all of the impacted wells across the several, you know, maybe 100 square miles, and the air emissions as well. We're utilizing our authority to ensure that they don't continue, that they aren't continuing to contaminate, and to do the very best we can to ensure that they meet their responsibilities to investigate and remediate the contamination. And as I've indicated earlier, in areas where we're outside the consent decree, we're using all the resources available to us and federal monies that are coming to the state at an opportune time for dealing with drinking water to try to address this problem as effectively and as completely as we can.
All right. Thanks, Mike. Tim Dutton from Merrimack.
Hi.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, so I think some of my questions were answered with the previous individuals. My dad is on Weir Road in Merrimack and is inside that 2-mile radius, and his well has very high levels right now. He was tested, I think, 2 years ago, and when they found out that they were very high. I guess my question is, and it sounds like it was discussed earlier, and I missed most of the meeting about filtration systems inside the house and when those might come around.
Okay, Jeff, can you answer that?
Yeah, so right now we have, not sure where you came into the meeting, but we have an agreement from Saint-Gobain, or between DES and Saint-Gobain, that provides for remedies for the 900 affected homes in the area. And there's two parts to that agreement. There's about 350 homes that are specifically listed, and the remedies for each of those is listed in a series of tables included in that agreement. And then there's this other 600 or so properties that are not specifically listed that are covered by a proposal that Saint-Gobain just submitted in the last few days to DES and or the Attorney General's office. And that document is currently undergoing legal review. But basically, this agreement lays out a path forward for providing a permanent remedy to all of the impacted wells due to contamination from Saint-Gobain.
Okay, so where can I find that list to see if he's on the one list?
I believe we'll be posting a link to that document. It's already posted on our website, but we'll repost that on with a video of this meeting, so it's readily findable. But it's right on our New Hampshire PFAS investigation webpage, which is part of the DES webpage.
All right, I'll go look it up. Thank you very much. Bye.
All right, thank you. Steve Brochu from Bedford, he has a second question.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, thanks. Actually, I had a problem with the mic, I guess, the first time. I live on Weymouth Drive, and I'm just kind of wondering, I saw the map that you sent in the text message, and it looks like there's quite a bit of the green icons, and I do apologize. This is the first time I've ever seen the map, and I'm just wondering, you know, what kind of levels would I think I would see on Weymouth, because it doesn't look like, or I've heard anybody saying that they've had their waters tested on Weymouth Drive.
Jeff, do you know that area?
I don't know the area in particular. I'd have to pull it on a map, and I'd be happy to do that with you tomorrow. But if you pull up our interactive GIS map, you can move your cursor over each of those individual points and then click on it, and you should see the actual numbers for the 4 PFAS compounds that we regulate. So you could see PFOA, for example. So if you hover over those green dots, click on them, you should be able to see the numbers of the individual wells.
Yeah, I did that, and I noticed that, and some of them were pretty high. I mean, I think some were in the 60 range, but then I seen one that was in red that was across the 101 was quite a bit higher. So I'm assuming that if it's across the 101 and it's that high, I mean, I'm not that far from the 101 either.
Yeah, we do see like dramatic variation in some cases from well to well, even wells that are on neighboring properties. So that's not unusual. But I'd be happy to follow up with you tomorrow. I keep the GIS map open, and I have a few more tools and options available that I can look at from my end internally at DES. So you know, I'd be happy to talk through your neighborhood and what I see there.
Sure. And how would you get a hold of me? Do you have my contact information?
If you could call me, my contact information will be presented at the end here. So you can follow up and give me a call.
Okay. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, sir. Christy Plum from Merrimack.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. So my question is, I'm 35 Brenda Lane in Merrimack. So I'm one of the 350 houses, I guess, in the initial decree. And so I've been receiving bottled water for 2 years. My house is one of 4 at the end of a cul-de-sac that is scheduled, I guess would need an extended line to hook us to town. And the time frame that I could see in the documentation that I read was, I think it said early 2023, which honestly at this point sounds awesome to me. And I'm grateful that I'm the first, in that first 350, because I know so many people are not. I just wondered, how realistic is that time frame, do you think? I know that may sound silly, but I know that the people being hooked up to filtration systems would be this summer, hopefully, and then the simpler town hookups are, I think it was maybe fall or the end of summer. So is that realistic, do you think, early 2023 for me? Or is it likely to be easily pushed out, 6 more months from that or whatnot?
I think.
Can I count on that?
I think Brenda Lane, if that's the a small cul-de-sac that's right at the end of
4
water line. I mean that should be pretty straightforward. And I can't speak until Saint-Gobain works with contractors and gets them lined up. I can't say for sure, but this should be a pretty straightforward project. And I couldn't rule out that they couldn't even do it sooner. But until we have contractors lined up and a design in place. We'll know a little better, but yours is about as straightforward as it comes as far as just running a line down that cul-de-sac.
Honestly, that's kind of what I thought. Talking to my neighbors, this is not what I do for a living, so I really don't have any idea. I just know that the rest of my neighborhood is entirely hooked up to town. So it seemed simple to me, but then because it was listed as extended and, kind of in that more complicated category, I was assuming more 2023. So, okay. So I shouldn't feel like it should be pushed out further than that. Basically, it could even be sooner, but we won't know for sure until they get back to us.
Yeah, they have the timeline I laid out. They have to start initiating discussions with the utilities and, design work. So, that should be initiated. And if all that can be accomplished before the end of the construction season and they can bid it and get a contractor lined up, and it's before the ground freezes, it's a possibility it could be this year.
Oh my gosh, that would be so awesome. So will we just hear directly? I'm trying to remember that part in terms of how we find out what the next step is. I know Barbara Healy's been in contact with me and I've been receiving stuff, but is that how that would happen next in terms of next steps?
Yeah, you'll be receiving something from Saint-Gobain. Those 350 properties that I mentioned should be receiving in the coming weeks a mailing from Saint-Gobain that outlines in more detail what individual properties are going to receive.
Awesome. Okay, thank you. I appreciate your time and your work.
All right, thank you very much. Looks like that's the end of the list for questions. Can we switch screens? Jeff, can you bring your presentation up? And Amy, can you stop sharing your screen?
Yeah, bear with me here while I bring that back.
I just want to bring up the contact information slide for all of the people that were on the panel tonight.
Is that showing, Jim?
You need to put it in presentation mode. Nope. There you go.
Is that showing up now?
Yeah, there we go.
Perfect.
All right. Thanks, Jeff. Well, this brings us to the conclusion of tonight's meeting. As we mentioned, here are the contact information for the various individuals that were available to help answer your questions this evening. This presentation will be posted on the DES website in the next day or so. So if you need to find that contact information, it'll be easy to do that right there. I want to thank everybody for their time and staying with the meeting tonight and all of the terrific questions that people asked. Thank you very much and have a good evening.